And we'll begin with roll call.
Chair Spears.
Present.
Vice Chair Hutt.
Here.
Commissioners Catalano.
Here.
Dennison.
Here.
Desai.
Here.
Friarman Hunt. And Pevsner.
Here.
At this time, we will have a report from the city attorney about the closed session.
Thank you, Chair Spears. The Planning Commission met in closed session with the city attorney to receive a briefing on a matter of potential exposure to litigation. No action was taken, and that is the end of my report.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up on our is the approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Agenda is approved. And next up, we have the approval of the minutes of April 19th.
I had no comments. Look good.
No comments.
Good. I'll
Okay.
move approval of the minutes then from April 19th.
Second.
It's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item that is not listed on the agenda. The Planning Commission welcomes your participation and input. When addressing the Planning Commission, please begin by stating your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to no more than 4 minutes in order to provide an orderly and timely meeting. So is there anyone who wishes to address us on an item that is not on the agenda? Okay. Seeing no one, we will close the portion for audience comments and move to the first item on the agenda, which is a public hearing. Looking for a staff report.
Yes, thank you. This evening's public hearing is a design review permit and a reasonable accommodation request for a property addressed at 350 Olive Tree Lane. We do have a PowerPoint presentation for you, which will be delivered by Assistant Planner Jonathan Perez. Just wanted to clarify for the record that the reasonable accommodation request that is being considered by the commission is strictly to address the location of the garage, to permit the location of the garage within the front of the house or within the front yard. It is not looking at omitting any purview from the commission regarding design review or placement of the garage within the prevailing front yard setback. So all of these things are certainly within your purview.
Okay.
At this point, we can go ahead and proceed with the PowerPoint presentation.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. The item before you is Design Review Permit 18-02 and Reasonable Accommodation Request 18-01 located at 350 Olive Tree Lane. Here we have an aerial view of 350 Olive Tree Lane. The subject property is outlined in red. Also note that this is a private street, Olive Tree Lane is. Pursuant to Code Section 17.20.027.c.3, a design review permit is required for lot areas from 11,001 square feet and up to exceed 3,500 square feet of gross floor area. Pursuant to Code Section 17.61.010, it is the policy of the city to provide people with disabilities reasonable accommodations as necessary to ensure equal access to their dwelling and/or place of business. Proposed project is the construction of a detached 630 square foot garage within the front yard setback. Sub-project summary table that was also included in the staff report and in your packets, pretty much detailing the logistics and sizes of the lot and the lot coverage, the height, things of that nature that I won't go into much detail about, but it pretty much meets most of the requirements. We do have a site plan, and I apologize, it is kind of small and blurry to read up at the PowerPoint. Again, the site plan was provided in your packets, as well as on the website online to review, but generally speaking, the garage will be located, where's the pointer? Well, the garage is located in the front of the main residence. We have some photographs of the existing, this is the existing property, the west elevation. The existing, I don't know what to call it, existing dirt parking pad space. Again, another view of the existing dirt space up at the front of the property. The garage floor plan is also up there. Again, it is kind of hard to read the dimensions, but they are located on the website as well as in your packets. The proposed elevations pretty much of the garage as well as the existing house. At the rear left, I believe that's the east elevation. Some more views of the existing and proposed garage. Here we have a visual simulation of what the property would look like with the proposed garage located at the front of the property. This is kind of a northwest view. It's kind of hard to see the property, but it is there. Another visual simulation taken from another angle, kind of west. And the design review permit findings, staff made the determination that the design review permit findings for DRP 18-02 could be found.
So, can we go back to the findings before?
Sure. And the actual answers to those findings, obviously you couldn't list it, on the limited PowerPoint space, so those were in the staff report and online,
Right.
at the website for everybody to view.
And the next one is that at the top, it talks about,
The next slide, you mean, or?
yeah, the next slide.
Oh, those are the
Innovative and thoughtful or no work actually responsible for a specific site rather than a standard generic or cookie cutter plans. Okay.
And then the following slide is the reasonable accommodation request findings, and staff was able to make those findings. And again, the answers to those findings in depth were included in your staff report as well as the city website for anybody who wanted to view. They were posted online. The alternatives for the project. The Planning Commission can approve the request for a design review permit 18-02 and reasonable accommodation request 18-01, subject to the conditions of approval. Approve the request for design review permit 18-02 and reasonable accommodation request 18-01 with modifications. Deny the request for design review permit 18-02 and reasonable accommodation request 18-01, stating the findings for denial. And lastly, to continue the subject project and provide direction to staff and the applicant. Staff's recommendation was that the Planning Commission approve design review permit 18-02 and reasonable accommodation request 18-01, subject to the Planning Commission resolution 18-04. And now, if you have any questions for staff, you'll be able to answer those if you'd like.
Jonathan, would you mind backing up to the drawings of the elevations? I'd like to see especially the front of the garage again. I mean, the garage door side.
This one?
No, I'd like to see just the flat elevation with the
Oh, the existing or the simulation?
the proposed.
The color.
Proposed? Okay, this is the.
The elevation.
Oh, the elevations, I'm sorry.
Not the perspective, the elevation. Okay, let's see the other one that shows the garage doors.
The south facing.
Yeah, there you go. Hold that one now. I was just curious about if those doors are 12 feet wide, how tall are they there as a design issue? Okay, I just wanted to have another look at that, thanks.
Tagging on that, couple of dimensional things. Can you state what the encroachment, the garage encroaching into the front yard, how much is that?
The required is 30 foot 6 inches, I
Yeah.
believe.
The encroachment is 3
3.5.
feet 6 inches.
3 feet
3.5
6?
Pretty much, yeah.
And do we know the dimension or the distance between the proposed garage and the house?
I believe it's roughly 8 feet round.
8 feet?
Yeah, roughly. I did, yeah, use a scale on the existing plan, or on the large site plan that was provided to me, and it was about an 8 foot, give or take, foot or two, but yeah.
Any other questions on the presentation?
Nope.
We all good? Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank
Thank you.
Commissioners.
Anything else from staff?
Again, just a reminder that we are looking at modifications, if any, to the garage structure. And that could be addressing setback issues, any encroachment to 3 feet 6 inches into the garage or into the prevailing front yard setback, and also any design-related issues that you find are necessary to meet the findings or design review.
And so to make sure, we have, we have a number of people in the audience, and just to make sure everybody here is aware we're all on the same sheet of music, one of our jobs here tonight is to make the findings, and the findings for this design, this is design reviews findings, were laid out by Jonathan in his slide, and we talked about superior design and things like that. And so that's the point, that's our focus for tonight. Anything else from staff? So is the applicant present? Would the applicant like to make a presentation?
Yes, please.
Please, come on down.
All right. So thank you all. My name is Dan Nugent. I'm here with my wife Sabina and a few friends and neighbors from the local community. Thank you, members of the commission, for the opportunity to review our proposed design with you this evening. I would also be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank the City Planning Department, who have entertained us with lots of questions that we've put them through, and we really appreciate their care and attention that they've given us as we've worked through this process. If you will indulge me, I'd like to take a few minutes to share some background on our family in Sierra Madre, on our proposal to build a serviceable garage for our home. And talk a little bit about some of the community support that we have for the project, as you've seen with some of the letters already. And I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have about the design and what our intentions were as we thought through some of the design criteria. So a little bit about us. My wife and I purchased our home at 350 Olive Tree Lane in 2013. Prior to that, we lived for 10 years in Upper Hastings Ranch, 1 block away from Sierra Madre. But we always considered Sierra Madre our hometown. We participated in city events, came and frequented the local businesses, enjoyed the city parks. Our kids did lots of activities in town at the rec center. So we have a great deal of appreciation for this community. In 2013, we found what we believe is our forever home when we were lucky enough to stumble upon 1350 Olive Tree Lane. Sorry, not 13. That was our old address, 350 Olive Tree Lane. We have since undertaken to remodel the house, taking a lot of care and attention to making sure that that we preserve the original character of the house. So everything from the color to the roof tiles, to the milled wood finishes. We tried to mimic everything that came with the house and kept the style of it, a lot of which we inherited. Some of the roof lines, but we really took care and attention to preserve the character of the house. And in fact, the remodel that we did was so true to the original house that we've had several of our neighbors stop us from time to time and ask us to explain to them exactly again what we did, because they can't tell the difference between the remodels that we made. In short, we deeply care about this community. We deeply care about our neighbors and our neighborhood, and we tried to reflect that in the design that we're proposing to you this evening. So let me take a couple minutes just to talk to you about the design from our perspective. One, our house is on a private lane that services auto traffic to 10 other houses, 8 of which have Olive Tree Lane addresses, some of which back up to Olive Tree Lane. 6 of those 10 homes have garages or carports that face Olive Tree Lane. And we are proposing to build a 2-car garage in the front portion of our home, which we think is within the character of our private lane, because many of the other houses have similar locations for their parking. For the design itself, the garage is designed to match the existing architecture of the house. We plan to use the exact same premium materials, the exact same milled wood finishes, the exact same color for the stucco, exact same roof color, so that it will tie in visually seamlessly with the existing structure. We also designed the garage using some architectural features to mimic both the Tudor style of the 2 front sections you see where it has the high roof lines, but we shed it out on the east and west, or sorry, the north and south side, shedded out the roofs so that we could bring down the structure and not have it dominate that space. So we really, we're taking pains to make sure that it is a kind of preserves the cottage feel of the look of the Tudor home and doesn't dominate that front section of the house. We also positioned it as a standalone structure rather than tying it into the house for a couple of reasons, but one of those was we think visually and architecturally it is nicer to have it separated, and we adjusted it a little bit so you don't have a straight plane going on the north side of the house. It'll be a little bit offset so that you have a little bit of differentiation as you move along the north side of the property. In terms of the lot usage, the scale of the 2-car garage, we believe is also consistent with and conducive to the lot. Our lot is almost a half acre. With the addition of the garage, the total usage of the lot will be just less than 20%. The size of the lot we think will readily accommodate a structure without compromising the integrity of the neighborhood or the local community. And then as a kind of final point, the community support. So we have made great efforts to make the garage blend in with the character of the city of Sierra Madre. We have shared the packet and the images with many people in town and have over 200 people, virtually everyone we've showed the images to and showed the documentation to is supportive and has signed a petition or a document of support, not so much a petition that I believe is circulating with you this evening. We've obtained letters of support from 6 of the neighbors who are around and have the closest view of the structure itself and who pass by the structure every day as they go to their homes. And we have several friends who've come out to support us tonight, and we really appreciate them being here. So in closing, we would ask the committee or the commission to approve our project, as we believe it will improve the functionality of our home, enhance the character and property values of our neighborhood, and because it enjoys strong support from everyone we've showed the project to. And with that, I'll ask if you have any questions that I can help answer.
Okay. Any questions of the applicant?
Do you drive automobiles or do you drive trucks or what?
So we have 2 automobiles that are parked at the house presently. One is a Honda Odyssey minivan and the other is a Nissan Pathfinder.
Okay. I'm interested just from the standpoint of how high those garage doors are. Like if you told me you were a tradesman and you had a reasonably large truck that would, okay, thank you.
No, and the doors, I'm gonna look at my wife here because she knows some of the details better than I do. The doors are, I think that, I understand your questions about that picture. The doors are not intended to be like oversized height doors. I
Yeah,
think
they
it's-
look like it in that
Yeah,
rendering.
and I think it's the function of the roof line sloping down over the garage that makes it, the doors are, they're standard height, right? Yeah,
Yeah, okay, so the intention here is that there's standard height, like
Correct.
7-foot high doors.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
How big was, you added onto the house and improved it? The picture we saw without the garage that's after you've added on, because you said the neighbors couldn't even tell, correct?
Right, so most of what we did was filled in an existing breezeway structure that already existed, that was already covered and roofed in. So I think our total added footprint was under 400 square
But it
feet.
was in that front facade of the house, though, is what it used to look like. You just kind of filled in the middle, sort of, so to speak.
So where we got the idea for the shed roofs is that we had, on the north side, there was some very small bedrooms, and we shedded out the roof, and added a section to increase the size of those bedrooms. And so you can see in those images, that shed roof
Right.
is something we added, and is something that we mimicked in the garage design.
Yeah, okay, what I was getting at, the house didn't come forward towards the property line. Okay.
No.
Can you speak a little to why, in citing this garage, it needs to encroach into your prevailing front yard setback?
Absolutely. So the primary reason is there is a front porch structure, and I think it's hard to see in some of those images, but it comes out a couple of feet from the front of the house. So from a need standpoint, to get a vehicle to pull in and be able to pull a vehicle out, having some separation between the door, between the garage structure and the main house, from a functionality standpoint, is important. And then from a design standpoint, if we push that garage too close to the bedroom, you start to close off any light and make a really tight passageway between the two structures that we were trying to avoid, just from a visual appeal.
And is the intention, on the plans, it looks like you've designed it as a two-car garage?
Correct.
So, just so I understand the access issue, so if you're in the garage, you back out to the rear of the car towards the front of your house?
Right,
So
so
that you
the front of the house is positioned here, the garage will be here, and you pull in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to either pull the vehicle up and back it in, or pull it in and back it up, and move out. Sorry, that was a little
Okay,
bit of contortion there. But to make it functional to move in and out without creating a large surface area of driveway.
Right, I understand, that makes sense.
Well, could you give us an idea then from the face of the garage doors to going directly south, and it must be paved in there because it looks like it goes around the back, so it must be paved like up where those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees are. What kind of dimension is in there?
So from the proposed south face of the garage
Right.
to the property line, I
How
believe
far
is
how
40.
far can you back up before
Oh.
you hit the trees or your neighbor's fence?
So the total distance is 40 feet, I believe. I think that's coming. I actually was reading that today in the proposed findings, so I may be off on that dimension. That's just my recollection.
What about?
Right, and then there's about 10 feet of landscaping and bushes and trees, and before you get to the fence. So
Are you done, Joe?
Yeah, for now. Go ahead.
Can you walk us through the design choices for the sort of combo pitch, where you've got a steep pitch and then a flatter pitch on the garage structure instead of just picking one?
So the steep pitch is designed to be the same dimensions as the two front kind of Tudor style pitches that you see on the main front of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And then the shed roof pitch on the existing structure that we added on matches the second story that we inherited. So the two sheds to the north and the south of this design, the design idea is that the peak will be, on the main house, the two peaks are offset, right? So the garage is designed to be the same peak as, the same height as the building, the part of the structure that is on the south side. And the pitches are designed to match the existing shed on the north side bedrooms and as well as the second floor. So that while there are two angles going on, there will only be two angles. We're not going to add a series of other dimensions. I don't know if that.
So
I almost need a
basically
picture to show you.
The steeper portion at the top matches the same pitch as the two little sort of front gables that pop out.
Correct.
And then the shallower pitch matches the second story.
Correct.
Okay.
How wide are those garage doors?
They are 12-foot doors.
12-foot doors. So the entire width of the garage is what?
I believe it's 30 feet.
30 feet.
Okay. And one of the reasons we are here is because that 30-foot garage encroaches 3 feet onto a setback.
Correct.
Is there any way that you could live with a 27-foot garage?
So the reason we went for the larger size doors actually has to do with the accommodation request. I mean, the same factors that go with the putting it in front relate to having access into a garage space. So that's why. So one, we need at least one stall that has oversized space to bring a vehicle in and out of. And then the issue was, well, do you have off-size doors, or do you make the doors match? And we went with making the door sizes match.
I'd like to note, though, however, that, you know, you can see all over the area that where there are larger homes with 3-car garages, that there are plenty of instances where there's one wide for 2 bays and a post and then a narrow for a single bay, and it does not, by virtue of that, make the make the garage or the house look wrong aesthetically. It depends on a lot of other factors. I don't think it's a necessary design element, if that's what you're asking about.
Okay.
Is the what's the dimension? The depth sort of
21
is
feet.
strange. It's 21 feet. And what is the corresponding sort of that same dimension of the small part of the house that pops out? Is that also 21 feet?
On the north side?
On the south side?
On the
s-
south
shorter
side.
one.
No, it's a much smaller, I think that is, I want to say 12, 15.
But the one on the north is bigger.
Right, and some of that we pick up with the shed roof
Right.
design, right?
But you already have sort of this issue of different, I mean, it's not like you're a entirely symmetrical house to begin with, right?
Correct.
Did you use an architect for this, or did you design it?
We had a group of professionals. I don't know that they're licensed architects, but they definitely have some skills in design. So I did not put together the visuals you saw, and we did have some people come in and help us think through how would you design that in a way that would make sense.
We did consult a couple of architects in the process, but the ones who drew it were draftsmen, and
Right.
they were an architect suggested that we use a draftsman because it's pretty basic, so that's what we did in terms of getting it put on paper.
Can you put that so we can put it on the record? We want to make sure we,
Oh,
at the microphone.
When we record it, we won't hear that.
sure.
Hi.
We consulted a couple of architects, and an architect suggested to us that we can just use Draftsman to create the images on paper, because it was a very basic concept and didn't require a lot of input from the architect or an architect. So we just pursued that course.
But we did get input and consult with some people to help us understand dimensions and how we could adjust roof lines and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, speaking of the roof line, you know, I've been looking at the main elevation, the garage door elevation of the garage, and I had previously stated some concern about the height of that, and incidentally, it does appear as though they've got the garage doors the full height in there. But what's interesting to me is that if you look at A4 detail 1, the west elevation, it appears as though the eave line is actually lower than that of the house behind it. But when we look at this front elevation over here on A3, that same eave line is higher than the adjacent one on the house. And, you know, that may just be a drafting error, but as we go forward with the whole thing, I think that that's something that ought to be looked at, because it would really affect the perception of the mass and the bulk of the thing.
No, I completely agree with you. Our goal is to line those two structures up and have them exactly the same height, just so there's some consistency to the design overall.
Yeah, I think we, you know, there's the basic premise of what you're doing. You know, we just have to make sure that, you know, where we can dial it down, that we do.
Sure.
Thought.
And staff's shared with you the concept of the design review and what we're here to find?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any members of the public who wish to present to the Planning Commission on this project? Please.
Elizabeth Cowell. I go by Chris. I'm at 273 West Laurel Avenue. I guess I have one question that might shed some light onto the encroachment of the property, and that is whether or not your system is hooked up onto the internet. Because if you were to look at a Google view of the street, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Olive Tree Lane. It is not a traditional street by any means. In fact, it looks more like an alleyway. As you go up the street, some of the properties are right to the edge of the lane. Some driveways, you couldn't probably even park a car on the driveway. It's the back of some houses. It's very not a standard street. And if you look at the Google view, go ahead and take the 3D look up the street, you'll see that the proposed area that they're looking to put the garage on is actually set back further from the street than most of the properties, and certainly would fit within that street and that neighborhood. And it would be one of the things that I would think would be taken into consideration when looking at that, as most of the properties are way over the setback for a front yard. And so it's not unreasonable in the character of that street with the properties that exist there.
I think staff looked at the setbacks of all the property, and there's a process for doing that. Would you like to hear from staff on how that was done?
I assume that was done. I'm not sure if the committee saw the street.
Oh, yeah, we
we're
go and
familiar with
visit.
Yeah.
Gone and visited.
We go and ring the doorbell and walk up and talk to neighbors, and we visit the property.
Okay.
So we've been there.
And what is the what was the justification for the setback for the whole of Sierra Madre as a city? Was it based on a typical street zoning for?
All the prevailing setbacks.
It's a
So-
prevailing
so
setback.
what that means is, you take the entire, for this instance, you take entire Olive Tree Lane, all the houses along that, and you actually physically measure what the setback is currently. And then there's an average that's developed for that entire street. And in this case, that average came out to 30 feet, 6 inches. And that,
So an
that's the
average
setback.
rather than like a mean? So like if somebody's house was at the back of the
No,
property?
I believe it
think we
takes into
throw out
account,
the
it
first-
throws
Throw
out,
the
we throw out
closest
the
and the
low,
farthest.
we throw out the furthest one, we throw out the closest one, and then
Okay.
take it, so.
All right, yeah, because, Sierra Madre, there's nothing. And so I guess that's the thing in pushing it back. Having been to their property, having driven it's a Toyota Tacoma, it's small, up into the space of where it would be, that ability to back out of where the garage is, it's not a simple, oh, there's plenty of room to back out. So I understand the rationale of the spacing that they chose.
Yeah, one of the wonderful things about building and zoning laws is that laws evolve over time. You could have some buildings on any street that are 75, 100 years old in a place like this, and they certainly wouldn't conform to the present zoning at all. Okay, but the zoning and the building codes go forward, and they don't require that you demolish and rebuild to keep up with the present zoning. So you can often find places that will be out of conformance with the zoning as it is, but that doesn't mean that everything new can be too.
Correct.
So we do go by the zoning as it is right now, and with due consideration.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's a spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law, given the street and the character, and not just otherwise you wouldn't be up for debate. It would be, no, it's over, and rubber stamping.
Well, what Mr. Desai was explaining a couple of minutes ago about what the process is for prevailing setbacks is a mechanism that is used so that we are taking into account the general character of the street from the standpoint of setbacks. And you go to other streets and it would be a very different situation, okay?
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to? Wow, okay.
My name is Matt Buckles. I am a former planning commissioner as of last year, and I am also an architect. And the applicant knocked on my door, and I live on East Miramonte, by the way. She knocked on my door, showed me the plans, and said, "Would you sign the petition?" I said, "No, I'm not going to sign the petition, but I'll come to the hearing and see the staff report and respond at that time." So from what I see, I think the design is fantastic and fits in well with the existing house, the Tudor design. And every house in Sierra Madre needs a 2-car garage, and this one, I don't see any other location to put that garage except at the front, because you can't get to the back of the lot because you can't drive back there because there's no room on the side yard setbacks to do that. And I think the positioning of the garage is appropriate. If they positioned it with the doors parallel to the lane, they would be backing their cars out into the lane and create more traffic problem than anything. So I think the 90-degree turn of the garage is appropriate, and I think the encroachment of 3 feet, 3.5, seems okay in that location along that street. And but if you make the garage doors any narrower, I think it'll be more difficult to pull trucks and cars into the garage and then back out again, and then drive straight out into the lane. So That's my thoughts, and good to see you again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to address the Planning Commission?
So this isn't specific about, everybody was detailed, it's more general. But my name is Andy Edmonds.
Can you state your name and address?
Yes,
for the
my
record,
name
please?
is Andy Edmonds, and I'm a Sierra Madre resident. I've been here for 18 years, and I own 2 properties here, 263 West Highland and 618 West Highland. Both of them were tear-downs, and I had restored each at considerable expense. And if you go down Highland, you'll know which the 2 homes are. Everybody said, forget it, they're awful, tear them down, but I restored them. So anyway, I've seen the plans, and I've studied all of the information concerning the Olive Tree Lane property. And I find the addition not only be in keeping with the rest of the properties in the area, but once built, I believe it will look like it's always been there. I don't think you'll be able to see that this was an add-on at all, which is important. I also believe that when a homeowner spends this much time, effort, and money to enhance a property that will end up being in line with the city's codes and standards, there's every reason to approve this. I also believe that the owners should be applauded for all their efforts to ensure that this addition is done properly and it's done to code, it's tasteful, and in consideration with the surrounding neighbors' properties. I strongly urge the Planning Commission to approve this without further hesitation. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the Planning Commission?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Karsten Bell. I live at 330 Toyon, which is just across Olive Tree Lane from the applicants, Dan and Sabina. We've lived in that house since 2011, although I've been a lifelong resident of Sierra Madre for 30-some years, 34 years, I think. We are fully supportive. Our property is probably most described as the most affected property by whatever may come of the addition to the addition of the garage. Our property line is directly abutting the property line of the applicant, and therefore we can see the garage and the addition mostly in our field of view. We're fully supportive. We've known Dan and Sabina now since they've moved in. They've been very proactive in asking us what might make sense for an addition at the property. We certainly understand. My wife and I understand, the reasons behind why you would need to add a garage in this location. It's a private driveway up Olive Tree Lane. We're very lucky to have such a wonderful section of Sierra Madre that we all love. And I think that adding a garage in this location and the orientation that it is, and especially considering the design elements that they've put into creating this garage, I think is perfectly fitting with the property. And for sure from our backyard, which we spend a lot of time in, we spend a lot of money upgrading our own property. Sitting outside, and we see their house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's plenty of room. It's certainly within the character of the neighborhood, and I fully support what they're asking, and would urge you to vote yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the Planning Commission? Please, come on down.
I'm Jerry Freidenberg. I live 2 houses above this at 370 Olive Tree Lane. I have a 3-car garage. The west gate or door is 25 feet from the street, and the Planning Commission approved this about 20 years ago. So, and I fully support exactly what they're doing.
Okay. Come on down.
Thank you. My name is David Sheen. I live at 198 West Grandview. My wife and I have been there for 41 years. I'd like to say probably the most important thing to us as far as Sierra Madre goes is to keep our wonderful village-like atmosphere. This place is like no other. With that in mind, I have an interest in this project because there are 3 houses between their house and mine, so it will affect me to a small degree. I've been on their property a few times. I walked up there this last weekend. I spent some time really carefully looking, seeing in my mind's eye where the garage would be, and then considering how it would be from the perspective of the surrounding neighbors, and also how it would look from the perspective of anyone driving up and down the road. What I concluded was that if this goes forward, it would have one significant effect that I could see. It would make the neighborhood in general more beautiful and more desirable. I could not come up with, I looked for it, but I could not come up with the downside from any angle that I looked at. I think it would be a good thing to do. That street needs some help in many cases. This would be a big positive. That's about all I have to say.
Anyone else wishes to address the Planning Commission at this time? Okay, seeing no one, we'll close the public comment and bring it back to the members of the commission. Phil, you wanna?
Well, I don't have anything to really substantively disagree with. I mean, I think they could, if they don't, the only question is if you could have an asymmetric door like a 12-footer to make the accommodation, and then an 8-footer or something. That's just my thumb size looking at the thing. Other than that, I think they're right. I think the where it is, putting the garage there, I don't know if you have much of a choice. So it's just a setback for me. If there's some way to make an acceptable design that would fit fit the findings.
Okay.
Oh, we're going this way?
Sure, why not?
We ducked better than you.
You know, while I definitely appreciate the thought that went into and the care that went into designing, you know, not just a box, you know, that houses a couple of vehicles, but, you know, is in keeping with sort of the spirit and character of the house. But the one point I keep struggling with and hard to make the finding for, I mean, there's a reason we have, you know, these zoning regulations and you know, as Joe eloquently put, you know, these setbacks and things, they're in place for a reason, you know, and you know, there's a prevailing setback on that street, and it's 30 feet 6 inches, and that's based on the math up and down the street. And it does accommodate, you know, those nuanced things such as the character, you know, considering the other houses, how far they are, how close they are, things like that. And I'm hard pressed to find a reason that this structure couldn't meet their needs, you know, to park vehicles in near the house and accommodate that and still be within the setbacks. I mean, I just, you know, I can doodle on here on paper and come up with several ways, you know, they may or may not be palatable from a layout standpoint, but, you know, I'm not getting a compelling reason from the applicant that this structure absolutely has to be 42 inches over the setback that's set for the street. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I'm struggling with that. I don't have any problems with the design and the layout and the fact that it's in the front of the house. I think it's done in a tasteful way. I think it could be perfectly fine and look like an extension of the house. But as far as the siting of it, there isn't a real compelling anchor or reason that it needs to be that size. And I think you can park 2 vehicles in there easily and within a 26-foot structure, you know, versus a 30-foot structure, and still have the oversized door and a standard door, or, you know, or something like that, or 2 10-foot doors. I don't know, you know.
I'm sorry, can I speak to that, please? I don't know if that's proper.
Well, hang on.
There'll be an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, hang on a sec.
So that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Okay. You wanna,
Oh, yeah,
Go ahead.
well, you know, I'm sort of mixed on this. I think one of the issues that we have on houses that are over 3,500 square feet is they have to make this special finding that their superior project that exhibits exceptional design. And I have a hard time getting to that. I mean, I think it's a fine house. It's nicer than my house. But if I stuck a garage in front of my house, I wouldn't think it's exceptional design either. And part of this goes to the issue of siting. One of the findings talks about architecture that's responsive to the specific site. And when you have a long, narrow site, the obvious answer is to put the garage in the back. But council and staff have told us there's a reasonable accommodation that we have to let this garage go in the front. And so part of the issue is, you know, I don't like that. I want it to go in the back. But you can't. So you got to get over that. And so I think about this going in the front and how you could best accommodate it with that as a given. And my first thought was jam it up against the house instead of detaching it so that it encroaches less. But by pulling it forward some, you do break up the massing, especially on the north side. I like that. I'm also not as concerned about the prevailing setback in this instance because a number of these houses have rather large walls that don't count for setbacks, but visually, you know, really sort of impinge on the feeling of mass and bulking approaching the street. So to me, I'm not as concerned with the 3-foot encroachment into the setback. I thought the sort of combo pitch on the roof was a little weird, but you explained why, and I see how it ties in, and that makes sense. I don't know if I'd make that design choice, but, you know, it's as good a design choice, I guess, as picking one of the other two. As far as the offsets with the sizes of the garage doors, I don't think having an asymmetrical garage doors would ruin the project at all if that's what other commissioners think is better. But I also don't think having the symmetrical garage doors is problematic either. So, you'd always like to see these shrunken a little bit, but and if other commissioners think that's important, but if not, I guess I could support this project as it is, given the reasonable accommodation. But if we didn't have the reasonable accommodation, I don't think this is a project that we could make these findings for.
I agree with Commissioner Hutt about the reasonable accommodation and making that finding for the placement, but I also agree with Commissioner Desai that I don't see sufficient finding here to encroach on the prevailing setback.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Yeah, I completely support the idea of putting the garage in the front, both from the standpoint of just the basic choice that the property owners, I think, have a right to make, and given the nature, the character of the street, I got absolutely no problem with that at all. A couple of particular comments. For 3 foot 6 inches, when there's so much more nuancing that can be done with this design, I don't see the compelling reason for allowing the encroachment. It can be gotten around. Also, there are a couple of issues when Commissioner Hutt was talking a minute ago about the idea of exceptional design. I see some things in here. Well, basically, it's a great idea, you know. Basically, the whole thing really works as part of the composition of a house and garage together. I'm just fine with that. I think that one of the other parts of what would make it exceptional design would be the bulk issue that could be helped a lot if we could just get this drawn so that we can see specifically, you know, get rid of that disparity between the two drawings in terms of the eave line, and bring the garage doors down to standard height and just bring it back a little bit, pull it in. I don't, as an architect, see the compelling reason for the encroachment right now, and I think it's basically a good project, and it's one that we definitely should let them do what they want, but I think it needs some tweaking, as I just described.
Okay. I don't doubt that if people are presented with the appearance of this garage looking from the east, that it is a good project. The pitch of the roofs and the design of the Tudor design is mirrored in the rest of the house, and so it appears to be a matching, so no problem. I'm on such a huge lot, I'm somewhat confused about why it needs to be in the front, but I understand that it does, and so we're going to look at it just as the design of the project itself. We're here because the project itself is 3 feet into the encroachment area, and you know, I'm very aware of that street. On the fire department, we would be very reticent to take a fire engine up that street because the street is narrow and small. We've had trouble getting the ambulance up that street because of the overhang of some of the trees and whatever. So we're already dealing with a narrow street. And so when you come up a narrow street and you're looking at, you pull into a garage, and I'm looking at the garage from the south, it's very wide, and it's got 2 12-foot doors. And it occurs to me that 2 10-foot doors, and we wouldn't even be here. It would be we could all live with it because it would be pulled back enough. So I'm a little puzzled, and I haven't heard the compelling reason. And remember, part of our findings is that we need to find for exceptional design. We need to find why this goes above and beyond. So I want to hear from the applicant. Why is this a 30-foot garage as opposed to anything else? What advantages that is, given the fact that you're already on a narrow street already. So you wanted to make a statement. I'm willing to open it up for you to help us out here before we take a vote. So would you like to address the Planning Commission? All right, so I'll reopen it for the applicant to make a statement.
Yes, sir. Part of the reason for the reasonable accommodation is safe navigation for me, and those dimensions accommodate that. And I don't know if that was made clear through the documents, and I thought it was, but apparently not. So the positioning is necessary for me to be able to do it, to drive in and out safely, and smaller openings would not allow me to do what I need to do to be able to use my garage or use a garage safely.
So I have a question.
Pardon me?
I have a question. There are 2 doors on the garage?
Yes, sir.
If one was 12 and one was 8, we wouldn't be here?
I don't know.
You can only drive 1 car at a time?
True, but I don't know what it depends on, because we don't have it set up, I don't know how it would be best navigable for my purposes.
Doesn't matter. You can tell us whichever one can be, left or right, it doesn't matter.
Right, no,
We're only looking at the size of the...
Right, no, I understand that. I just don't, I just don't know which would work, and it may change over time, and that's my concern. How, and because of the nature of the condition, it's hard for me to state that without getting into my privacy. So that's something that we can, if you'd like, I could discuss it more in closed.
No, we don't need to know. But we were just, with, if the size of the door is a manifestation of of what we need to do, that's fine. We're happy to do that. But there are 2 doors.
No, I understand that, and I just don't know over time, because of coming in at an angle. If it were more direct, I don't think it would be as big of a problem, but having to come in an arc, that I don't even know what would be my best option, and I don't know that wouldn't change over time. So an 8-footer, no way. Even 10 is, that's why we opted for 12, because we know that those would both, at least in terms of entry, be more navigable. But then I just don't know, coming in and out over time, how that would manifest, for me. I just don't know.
May I add something that might be helpful here? You recall a while ago I had asked you about how much depth you had behind the garage door. For sake of comparison, in a parking lot layout, the depth of the aisle, the drive aisle, that is right behind the parking stalls, almost every building code, the minimum requirement in there is for 25 feet, and you said that you had approximately 40. So I think that part of the solution to this may be to look a little more specifically at exactly what your driveway layout is. You may have enough room to really be able to just consider that you may also have a lot of room because of the depth of your property to align yourself. You don't have to be coming in at an angle, and I hope that would be, one way or another, would be helpful to you.
It's just hard to say unless I had the physical condition to be able to say, oh yeah, but I just know how I navigate in the world, and I just go with paths of least resistance. I park through. I try not to back up. I do, there are various things that I do that.
I'm going to say you've never seen her park at Costco, because we're way out at the fringe of the parking lot where there's no other cars.
Yeah.
So one of our things that we can do tonight, rather than take a vote, is to continue this and offer you time to look at the layout and exactly see. One of the drawings we don't see here is the overhead drawing as to how you're going to park and what the approach is going to be to this structure. So what we're hearing from the commissioners is that the overall design is from the east is good. It's just that we haven't heard all the facts about why it needs to encroach. So would you like to continue this so you can bring us back additional information?
I'm not sure. I don't know what we could provide that would compel you one way or the other than my explanation of the ingress and egress. It would literally have to be there for me to be able to tell you, hey, this works or it doesn't. I think just from my experience, for smaller spaces, I just know that a 12-footer should be able to do what I need to do, but I don't know going forward if, being in one is better than in another, but I just know that the 12-footers would make it more, would make it navigable.
So, but I don't want to try to answer the question for you, but what you're saying is with your accommodation that you want to be able to use either or, and you don't know how that over time is going to work. And so it may be that at
Exactly.
one time your accommodation, you may find it's easier to go left versus right. And over
Correct.
time, that may be what you're doing.
Correct.
What if you just had one 20-foot door?
That's what I was just
another.
thinking.
Well, part of the thought was, but that would then leave two 10-foot spaces, and then that would be a one-car garage for me. That's why the 12-footers,
You need a 24-foot door. at least,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Well, you could, within a 20-foot wide door, you can do whatever you
can
want.
park
But if there's a vehicle in there already, then that makes it,
Limits
it
your
it absolutely limits me. I know that, yeah.
Well, here's another component to this. I mean, you talked about, first of all, there was no dimensions on the plans as far as how far this structure is from the bedroom or the part of the house that's adjacent to it.
No,
It
there
is
is,
8 feet.
8 feet, okay. And,
That was correct.
you know, in many parts of this town, we have side yard setbacks that are about 5 feet. And the reason we have those, it's a percentage of the lot width. In your case, it's more, but the point being, the reason we have those setbacks on the sides is for light and air and access, right? And those, at a minimum, you know, in certain cases are 3 feet, in some cases are 5 feet, okay? So it's very well possible this structure could move 3 feet closer to the house and still manage all the concerns that you have regarding light, air, the window outside that bedroom, whatever that is, and access.
Right.
So, you know.
And I guess I think you're right that it's feasible. I guess I would just challenge that a 3-foot space for 20 feet is going to be pretty tight and narrow, and aesthetically, to me.
How about
Not
a
3
5-foot
No,
space?
It's I've been out there. I've walked it. I've held up, curtains to kind of get a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be done. I just think you're taking some. I think you're really detracting from the, the visual of the property. And
I agree.
it's just my personal belief. We're trying to make it look as nice as we can in that space while accommodating the other limitations we have.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you realize that we have all but the southern neighbor had provided us letters and or signatures for this thing, and then within the 300-foot radius, we had support of this, and I just wanted, if that was something that you were not clear on, I wanted to also indicate that to you.
Will this be the first time that we have to do story poles for a one-story structure?
No, I don't. Look, I don't know if we want to go back around here, but from my
So we close the public?
sure.
Let's, all right, so we'll bring it back and so we can discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm completely fine with the structure, okay? I am finding very hard to find a concrete reason for this to encroach over a prevailing setback. So, and there doesn't seem to be any wiggle room from the applicant regarding, the necessity for the door sizes and such. So, and furthermore, they're not certain how they're going to use it, and yet we're designing a concrete structure. It's going to be here. I wouldn't be able to make that, the siding of it, to encroach, to allow it to.
I think, when we'd gone around before, I think the issue of shrinking the garage, I from a design standpoint, not from a utility standpoint. Design standpoint, I'm all in favor of that. If they shrink it 3.5 feet, then the whole project works and we're all good. But it sounds like that's not going to work for them. So if it has to be a 30-foot garage, you know, from my perspective, I would rather have it invade the prevailing wage, or prevailing setback a little bit, and have a greater feeling of spaciousness to break up the massing as it's presented here. I mean, and part of this comes back to the whole concept of prevailing setbacks, which I'm not a huge fan of. And I think the standard is 25, and that's fine. And if we had that, we wouldn't be arguing about this. So, you know, I understand people have different design concepts and thoughts on what's most important. So, I don't know. It sounds like on a consensus basis, we're sort of 2 to 4 or 3 and 3. So I don't know. Maybe we could punt it and see if the applicant figured out some way to shrink it 3 feet, because that would fix it. Or I don't know. Or maybe some of us change our mind.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of convinced me. I get her. I mean, I don't need to know the details, but if it's either or, and that meets the requirement for their accommodation, I'm inclined to, like John said, I'd rather have them move it out and have that spaciousness from the house and encroach into the setback than try and, you know, squeeze it and make it then not right. I get it, what everybody else is saying, because we've seen projects where we come across stuff and sort of, you know, the attitude is, well, we have to live with this forever. You may sell the house next week, you know, that kind of thing. And I don't think, obviously, that's reasonably happening here, but you know, I think given the accommodation, I think it's something that I could live with if it was 50 years from now. So I guess that's how I'd have to look at it, and maybe it'd be of utility to some future buyer. So I'm okay with it. I mean, if you guys want to bring it back and let somebody have them take another look or think about it for a while, that's fine too.
What are you looking at me? One thing I'm curious about that we haven't discussed here yet is, you know, we always hear somebody pop up at the podium and, you know, and cite precedents. How are we going to, I'm totally, it's very, very interesting as an architect who has to deal with these things periodically. It's a very, very interesting, for instance, to me of, you know, of accommodation, being that there's so much that really isn't known about the particulars. You know, it's not like, well, this is how much ramp you need. You know, so. And I think that we need to be giving in that regard.
But I think, Joe, with regard to the issue of precedent, I think there has to be absolutely none, because the whole concept of reasonable accommodation is we accommodate someone's individual issues. So this is not a precedent for any other house. Well, and so if somebody, especially someone who doesn't need a reasonable accommodation, comes in with this house, and they say, you approve that one, we can say, yeah, but that was a different deal. There was a person who had an individual issue, and it is not precedent.
I'm not using that, John, as an argument against at all. I'm just looking for the way that it can be documented, so that there's something on the record about the idea that this is for a particular accommodation.
Right, and I think
nothing more than that at all.
The issue, it is documented. We have one of the approvals we're doing is a reasonable accommodation request. So that's plenty well. And what I'm arguing against is I'm going to argue against the next house that comes in. Because if somebody's watching and they look at this house and they come in next and they say, I want that, and they don't have a reasonable accommodation, I want to be able to say, no. So I think we very, very much need to be very, very ad hoc and individualistic in dealing with this reasonable accommodation. That's why we have a special section of our code that provides for it, and that's what we're going through.
Just for the purpose of the record, and I don't know that this will help you in your decision, but legally, a request for accommodation, it doesn't mean that you have a right to exactly what you're asking for. It has to be reasonable, given the needs. The point of a reasonable accommodation is that it would permit you, in the case of land use, is that it would permit you to use your lot in the way that someone who does not have a disability can use theirs. It doesn't mean that you get to place in a situation with the garage. The reasonable accommodation request here is to place the garage in the front yard. It's not about the size of the garage. What might help if you're concerned about the size of the garage and the encroachment into the setback is maybe some kind of an engineer design where you actually have someone who's a transportation engineer, for example, I mean it could be somebody else too, design the path given the size of the cars to explain why, because there is nothing in the record that supports why the bays of the garage need to be 12 feet wide each, and it's unclear from what the applicant says which one they're going to use. So there are a lot of open questions for you that, and so therefore one of your options would be to continue the meeting and request additional information. Now, on the other hand, you could accept the information before you if you think it's sufficient, and you've also heard a lot of testimony from people in the neighborhood that support the design as is. But I just wanted to make it clear that a request for a reasonable accommodation as a matter of law does not mean that you are entitled to exactly what you are asking for.
You know, and to tack onto that, I mean, a lot of these are standard things an architect or an engineer, like there are things called turning radiuses, and you can even find them for every type of vehicle, from school buses to motorcycles,
Right.
That could easily tell you even which side would be optimal for the accommodated larger bay. You know, I mean, these things exist, so it's not like it would be unreasonable to request that or to see that, or, you know, even for the applicant to be able to study that, you know, and figure out, because I think those things exist. I mean, you know, there are standard turning radiuses, you know, and you could increase it if you needed to or whatever, but those things exist. I mean, I don't think I think the accommodation can be reasonably made, but the structure, without the structure having to encroach. I mean,
And in support of what you just said, I believe, just extrapolating from what dimensions there are here, I believe that there are turning radiuses, backup space, and so on and so forth that probably exceed some public roadway situations that are on a smaller scale. So we would not be asking the applicant to navigate something that's any less than what's found in the public roadway, which would be wrong, and that may be one standard that we could use.
anyway.
I think, you know, there's a little or nothing that's apparent about although I do applaud the mention in the application that they will use pervious materials, and so that would, you know, that kind of opens it up in terms of, well, how much of the front can you pave, and certainly I think that we should have an easy time if they wanted to, you know, pave an excessive amount with pervious materials, just to add a lot of flexibility to.
And speaking to that point regarding impervious materials, staff found out today from Public Works that rain barrels to capture rainwater are no longer permitted in Sierra Madre, so it would have to be captured possibly through a bioswale or part of the landscape.
Rain garden or something.
Wait, what?
You can't put the barrel? How about a cistern? Could it go into a?
Do a cistern.
Oh, so it has to
but
be
it would
underground.
Probably an underground cistern.
That's
what I
from
mean.
Public Works?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna go.
I don't,
Well, okay, so
it's okay, Joe. You
it's,
guys want to hash out the specifics. I don't think I need it. I think I have enough information, but go ahead. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I agree with Commissioner Desai that I think that I would love to fine for it. I don't feel that I have sufficient cause to fine for not adhering to the setback.
So,
But I would love the opportunity to get that.
yeah.
and I would too.
And-
I'd like this to work.
So before we vote, because once we vote, things are set. I would like, I think the resolution, I think some of the solution would be that if the applicant would come back to us with some more specific information, especially in terms of the radius and the turning, and you may, I can tell you that when we have other designs and we want more information, we do things like story poles, where we put up the poles and people can see, how big is this thing? I don't think you need to do that, but I think you may need to do something on the ground so that you understand how you would use this and how this garage would be best accommodate what you want it to do. What I'm hearing is that we're trying to offer you accommodations so that you have a place to park, and we don't, and for me personally, I know that the street itself is very narrow. If you lived on any other street in town, you would have much more room. So you already are navigating a narrow street, and perhaps, in the layout of how this garage is situated, you may find some resolution as to how it's going to get used. My other suggestion, personally, would be that you may reach out to an architect. You've used design people, but I'm a big fan of architects. I'm not an architect, but I hire them all the time. They seem to know things about how space is used, and they seem to know things how we use our buildings. And they have access to incredible amounts of information that can be used as facts as to why things are the way they are. And they can also help you explain why the plate height in this garage is higher than it is at the height it needs to be. In other words, one of the things that we are all concerned about is bulk and massing. So one of the reasons that we asked you to come back and give us more information just a minute ago was that we want to hear that so we have facts on which to base our decision. Because I think, as you've heard, we're kind of at a quandary, and we have unanswered questions about, well, what, you haven't heard anybody say the design of the building as its appearance is substandard, but we have questions about why it needs to be the massing and why it does. And we want that information. So it would be prudent, I think, if you would take a continuance and bring us back some more information. The other thing I can tell you is that your drawings are a little substandard. There's not a lot of information that there's some whatabouts, and the reason you have an architect is the architect can explain why it is the way it is, and they have a better sense of language than I do. That's why we have architects on the commission, because they can understand how these things are and what's going on. And so I don't doubt that this project can be done. I am not hearing all the reasons about why it needs to be the way it is, and we would like more information. Can you live with that? Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
But sorry, may I ask a question?
Sure. Sure.
I don't know what an architect could provide in the way of understanding the accommodation component of it, because that's something that's.
I think the answer to that is probably one that's for your privacy, you'd best talk to staff and council about the type of information that we'd want. We don't want to know whys. We want to protect your privacy. So, you know, if we get things that are certified by doctors or engineers or whatever, say this is what I need, then that's great. But the particularity of that information is, I think, best for you all to talk to staff in private, not in a public hearing.
But it would also, the time would also give you maybe some, the ability to lay out. And you know what, once it's built, we don't care if you paint lines on it, you know, so to, whatever it is that it'll, you know, to help you use it the way you need to use it. But it may be helpful if we could see a drawing from overhead, okay, this is the approach and this is how it's going and this is why it needs to be the way it is. Does that make sense? Okay, so.
And I do see opportunities here to make adjustments that could be important from a design standpoint in the end, that would really not be like questioning or challenging the detail of the accommodation. And I think that if anything, maybe because the nature of this, there are things that we're groping for as far as, you know, what do you really do, you know, for this kind of accommodation. But I see, we've heard some issues talked about tonight that would relieve the bulk, could position things a little differently, that I think should figure into what the chair is talking about here.
You've taken notes and you've heard of our discussion, so I think you have a pretty good sense. And they have a tape, you can play it back all night for if you want, so that you have an understanding of what we're trying to grapple with. And I think you've heard our questions, so that you can, and that's, you know, if you can answer them, I think this can go forward.
So then the only question is, do we want to do a date uncertain, or do we want to do a date?
I prefer to do a date certain, suggesting June 21st to give the applicant opportunity to hire an architect or do the exercises that have been offered.
Okay.
Is that okay?
June 21st?
Well, you can work with staff on as to a date.
But we have to pick a date.
We have to pick a date?
We would have to renotice the meeting.
They don't want to renotice, we've got to pick a date. We can do July.
Okay, let's do July.
July is it 5th?
We have two meetings in July, July 5th and July 19th.
It's up to you. It's your call. Is that convenient? Okay.
Okay. I'll move we continue this project until the July 5th meeting to give the applicant time to provide additional information and/or revise the project.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much. So, can we take a 5-minute break and then come back?
Yeah.
Okay. session?
We're back and open.
Okay. So this is the second item on our agenda, discussion regarding amendments to entitlement review and notification procedures from staff.
Thank you. We have another PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to go through. So basically, the discussion this evening is what I wanted to address is try to streamline the entitlement review process. Staff has come across that we have a number of different procedures, a notification radius, whether it be posted site or mailed notices, courtesy notices, for whether it be a staff level review or a planning commission review. And we want to try to simplify that a little bit. And also to take a look at a possible proposed modification to the historic preservation ordinance that is in line with a recent amendment to our discretionary demolition permit. This particular flow chart gives you an idea of the various entitlements and also the various procedures that are required for each of those. So on the far left, we have conditional use permit and a variance and also design review. Those are all entitlements that go before the Planning Commission. They are all required to be posted, a signboard posted on the site, and a 300-foot radius notification, courtesy notice to the neighbors. Following that is a affidavit of the posting requirement. That has to be done 14 days prior to the, as part of a comment period to allow neighbors to come in and provide comment. And then they would be able to proceed with a notice of decision. There's still a 14-day appeal period at the back end of that decision by the Planning Commission. And eventually, they'll be able to submit for a building permit. And if they were doing a demolition of a structure, there would also be a 30-day wait period for that. So you can see there's quite a bit of built-in delay and review to try to get everyone an opportunity, especially the public, an opportunity to have some input in the process.
And that 30-day wait period for the demolition is a separate
Yes.
period from the others? It
Yes.
doesn't, that seems strange. Because after your appeal rights have run, what's the point of a delay? I mean, the public could come in and jump up and down, but their rights to do anything about it are over.
The 30-day delay period or the wait period is basically to try to, once they have a building permit, now they have to contact the various utilities to be able to turn off the gas before they start demolition. Notify Athens for recycling purposes of the materials that are going to be removed.
HMB for demo. You
Yeah.
have to do a 10-day notice before you even touch the building.
And the AQMD and all that other stuff comes after the city?
Well, you have to get your building or demo permit, which is that. So the 30-day waiting period allows for.
So that 30 days is probably not gonna really hold people up, because there's.
No,
other-
because there's stuff you have to
Yeah,
do
okay.
in that.
And
Well,
they
why
can
do,
even
why do we have,
current.
a contractor has to be going through all of those routines regardless, so why is it even on our radar? I don't understand.
And as I show in another slide, sometimes I do take those off. But basically, yeah, that's after you've already had any review of the project and after a building permit has been issued. So yeah, we don't, I just wanted to show you what the overall timeline is for a typical project.
Okay.
So the next column to the right is a minor conditional use permit and an administrative design review permit, which is at a staff level review, and so is the minor variance and the second unit permit. The area highlighted in orange, posting on site, and the other three items will stay with column 2. There is a posting requirement for minor CUPs and administrative design review permits, but there is not a posting requirement for the minor variance or second unit permit. So again, we're showing some discrepancies and how do we want to treat these. Similarly, if you look at the noticing requirements or the radius map and the mailing requirements. We have a 150-foot radius for a minor variance, and everything else is 300 feet. And same thing with the comment period. For some reason, we have a 10-day comment period for a minor variance. And in our ordinance, we have a 20-day comment period for a second unit ordinance. However, looking at the state ordinance for second units, I did not find anything that referenced a 20-day requirement.
So that's a local thing, that something we came up with?
It possibly could be, but
It's local. I think it's left over from an earlier version of what was once called your second unit ordinance.
Yes. I think it was actually called Granny Flats ordinance.
It
at one
was
point.
originally, yeah.
Yeah, that's Charlie Martin. Yeah.
so looking at this next slide, it'll show what the proposal is. So basically what we're proposing is to eliminate the posting of a signboard for all projects involving a staff level review. And also regarding the direct mail notification to adjacent neighbors, increasing, especially for the instance where we only have a 150-foot radius, to make them all consistent and do a 300-foot notification radius. And regarding the public comment period, 10 days and the 20-day for second units, just make them consistent and have them all 14-day public comment periods. So what that would look like, and then it's up for debate amongst the commission, that would be the structure that we would be providing notification regarding posted notices or a radius notice, mailing notice.
The radius notices are provided by the applicant, right?
Yes.
And they pay for the postage as well?
They do not. Postage, if it is a posting that's going before the commission, it's a $692 fee.
So that's
to pay for posting.
So
but they pay for the production of a radius map and also for the mailing labels.
Do we charge them for the minor variance that's got the lesser radius? Do we charge less?
$323.
Okay, so it's $300. It's not a huge amount, but it's something.
Would there be any instance where you had a minor and administrative level or staff review and it would be a good idea to have a posting for the general public to know what the heck is happening?
I like the post boards because I think they're more useful than those mailings. I mean, I think the mailings get lost in the junk mail. And I think a lot of people notice stuff when they drive by. So I would rather require the postings for everything. But I guess the one thing I do have a concern with is the second unit, because that, under state law, is now ministerial, right? I mean, we're talking about these notice requirements for discretionary permits because people can come in and give their thoughts. But we don't require any kind of notice for somebody just, pulling a building permit to build a garage in the back that you don't need any kind of review. Yeah, in the back, right? Not in the provincial setback, right? And so second unit, we have, well, we used to have this 20-day thing, and we can have a sign or not a sign, but people can't really do anything about it. If it's by right. So why are we noticing it at all? I mean, state law doesn't require us to notice, right?
No, it doesn't.
And I know some people in town are bent out of shape about it, but state law makes us do this. So why are we getting people worked up? Because so they can come in and yell at staff, and the staff can tell them, sorry, I can't do anything, I gotta approve it?
Yeah. On the other hand, keeping the public informed.
Right, but we don't,
but there's nothing they can do.
And we don't, like I said, we don't have the same requirement. Like I said, if you're putting, instead of a second unit, let's say you have a pool house that looks exactly the same, right? No posting, no notice, no wait period. You pull your building permit, you go build it.
But the second unit will impact traffic and other kinds of things in the neighborhood. I
Right.
mean, I would like to know if my neighbor is gonna put in a second unit so we can talk about parking.
But you can't do anything about it.
But you can't do anything about it.
I can still talk to them about it. Hey, where are you gonna park that? Where is that person gonna park? Because the my neighbor is still the landlord, and the landlord can set up certain kinds of obligations for the tenant. Please don't park in front of my house, park, in front of your house kind of thing. I don't know.
To me, it seems like the 300-foot radius notification is it's short of garbage, but in the sense of you're notifying, like, the most immediate neighbors, the ones who are the most impacted by a second unit or something, or whatever it is, they should have the opportunity to have that exact discussion, whether they can do anything about it. I think that's valid, but like this, you get the little postcard that, that doesn't serve. I don't think that a sign serves.
Historically, though, have we grandfathered in multiple times for RENA numbers pool houses that don't need this notification, so that they can be converted to a second unit?
Oh, yeah.
And we'll continue to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's actually
in fact, it's required.
better.
It's required in our housing element. It's required that we ran one amnesty program, and we're required to do another one.
And
It seems like we should make this as easy as possible for people to do this second unit.
And then we'll apply for the pool next year,
That's right.
I understand the desire to know what's going on, but there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And as far as the radius for the minors, if for some reason we thought it's better to drop that down to 200 or 150 for $300 savings, I guess I'm fine with that.
Look, it seems like chump change, but you know what? On these smaller projects, like, that permit could be 1,500 or 2,000, the building permit, it all adds up, plan check, and so.
You are dealing
that
with
is
sort
something.
of a different beast, because a CUP or
That's a bigger.
design review is what, like $4,000?
54.
54 now, and the other one's less than $1,000 bucks, right?
1,100?
It's over now. Well, still.
How much is it close to sign?
Not including notice.
So still, $300 is a pretty big chunk of that,
Yeah.
And really, you're sort of talking more in the immediate neighbor. You're talking to somebody who's 250 feet away.
150 feet should cover at least behind, sides, and probably across. It'll touch. I don't know if it'll touch multiple houses. Depends on the lot.
A lot of situations that can be two to three neighbors deep.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
Plenty. Like
It's plenty. You want to put a little shed that wants to be.
No, you helped me on my house when I put a light on the end of the driveway that was too high, and we sent notice cards to people 3 streets over.
that doesn't make sense. It's just so.
I've had people bring me those cards because they knew I was on planning commission. What does this mean?
It means you got a yellow card. That's what it means.
So see this address, see this, the posting on site, I think, provides people with plenty of notice. And I think especially.
A lot of people see those.
People see them and well, what's up, and it starts a conversation. I totally agree that they could come into you and say, why can my neighbor put in, and you can explain to them about the state law and all that. But at least it would start the conversation, and it would make them aware of how their neighborhood is changing. And I think I'd rather be sensitive I'd rather have that conversation. The notice cards, I'm not sure that they, I think they have a role, but I'm not sure that they do what they're intended to do.
Well, they're better than that posting notice in the back of the newspaper and that unreadable pile of junk.
Yeah, but it really is like Sierra Madre. It's like, you're talking about, well, I talked to my neighbor and maybe we'll have a conversation about the parking. It's Sierra Madre. It's what neighbors do, and actually maybe there'll be some proactive choices that come out of that. So that sort of thing. So I think we should err on the side of being neighborly here.
Yeah, so whether it's a 300 or 150 foot radius and actually for the second unit could be 150 feet too, because those are the people that are going to be the most impacted.
Or what about, like, is there a mechanism to just notify the immediate neighbors,
Well, you could just make it 100 feet.
No, but is there just like, you need to get a notarized or whatever, like, I talked to Susie, Joe, and Jeff, and
No,
Barbara.
instead of
and
postage. Instead of sending them,
Instead of like the card, like, I'm doing this project in my backyard, and like.
It depends on the relationships between the neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, on the notice companies that do those radius maps, you know, you just put in the radius number and bloop, the thing comes out, so.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's 100 or 150 or 5,000 or whatever, they'll just tell you the list.
Well, it goes to cost too.
The postage is what gets you the big cost, because, you know, pi r square, right? I mean, the area starts to get a lot bigger pretty quickly, so, and then you get a lot more
Staff does
postage.
actually is doing the notice on the cards and doing the postage and putting the labels on. So I was doing one today for 900 feet, and it took a while.
So you have to physically do it?
We physically do them, yeah.
They don't contract that out?
No. 900 feet is a different?
No, this is a different case.
Okay.
So time out. This is not something you tell the.
No.
The radius.
Staff does it.
Staff physically does
We
it?
prepare the notice.
Yeah.
And we do the mailing, and we'll receive the mailing labels from the company who's prepared the radius map, but we're physically doing that.
Yeah, and I think the reason is that it used to be probably we had the affidavit thing, and then people would say, I never got it. And,
It has to officially come from the city.
So that was my
Right.
question is,
The list?
we have an
No, the list
affidavit.
The mailings.
It comes from, it has to be a current, so it would have to be pulled from the assessor records within, you know, a fairly recent time frame. Usually it's 6 months. If they're older than that, we would want them to be updated again. So that's why we have the applicant has to secure that.
Right. But then you turn it over to the city because it officially has to go out from the city, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's why the
And then we
city
have a
knows
notice.
knows it happened.
Right.
But the
And
big
then they get an
issue,
affidavit of posting, affidavit that they've actually, you know, we received the information that it's accurate.
See, the big issue with the mailing is it goes to the property owner.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if it's a rental, it goes to somebody in Laguna Beach who owns the house, and the person who lives there never knows. And that's one of the reasons why the sign is so useful, because the people are actually nearby or drive by or walk by, see it.
So you have the affidavit under the minor CUP, but not the minor variance or second unit?
The affidavit of, that would be for an affidavit of posting. So,
Oh, because only the first one has posting requirements, right?
Yeah, so.
well, it's still an affidavit. It's just, I left out the word affidavit.
Oh,
in
on the other two.
14-day
Okay.
comment
Oh,
period.
on those?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems like reducing the radius notification on the minors is what I would be all for, and though I'm not in agreement with everybody else on this, I don't think we should be requiring notification on the second units, because there's nothing that can be done about it.
Yeah, I just think that's over.
So would it, in the interest of consistency, if we did the same process on all four, would that be a problem for staff?
No.
But see,
What does that mean?
If you wanted to post anything that whether it's staff level or a commission review, that's something that we can certainly do, have that requirement built in. The next question would be, do we want to reduce the notification for all or for some?
Maybe I missed it. I thought you said that the posting was like $5,000.
No.
For a CUP variance or design review is about $5,400.
What's the
blue
fee
box.
to post?
For posting, if it's going before the commission, it's $632.
That's to send the cards.
That's for the 300
Okay,
feet.
so
He's talking about
where it says posting on site, because Bob was talking about,
That's
sorry,
the
Commissioner
sign.
Spears.
That's the-
Yeah, the sign. I'm asking, what does it cost to do the sign?
That is up to the property owner. We send out a template, we fill out that
Yeah.
template.
It's about $150.
It's
It's
just a printing.
3x4
Okay.
waterproof,
Okay.
and they
But
post it, they
The
send it out
radius
to.
is 300, he
Yeah.
says 600 and some odd, and 150 was
And
300.
Yeah, it was half price, yeah.
But the board's like 150.
Yeah.
All right, so Vincent, so there's, for each one of these situations, your staff has a different procedure to follow, right?
Right.
Okay. What's the backstory here? Why is it so complicated for them to just follow one of those four that, I mean, what's your internal, what your operating reasons for having to simplify this? No, I'd really like to understand that.
It's basically that. It's just to simplify it because I would always be getting questions, well, what is the notification for this purpose or for this particular application? And there seems to be, we keep forgetting. So that's, at one point I did this sheet and I wanted to post it in the office so we can always say, oh, yes, this is the procedure.
I mean, Joe, the reason why it ended up like this is we just made it up as we went along. It didn't bother to check what we were doing before.
So this is check, okay.
And we rewrite one part of it, and we forgot to look at another part of it, and then so it's like, it's always different, which is very difficult for staff.
The one thing we did do is when we made the administrative design review, we piggybacked off a CUP and minor to not.
Okay, well, that's all
purposely
good
not
explanation to me.
But one
Thank
question
you.
I do have is, Hillside and administrative Hillside, those are the same as CUP as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, we got something right. I'd be in favor of just blind consistency.
Yeah, see, I think the problem with blind consistency is I really see three groups of projects. You've got commission level design review or discretionary review, staff level discretionary review, and upright. And so I think it makes sense to have three different procedures. I think it's crazy to have a different procedure for minor variance than minor CUP, because those are both staff level discretionary review. Or if we had a different one for, design review than Hillside than CUP. But I think it makes sense to have three groups, and it makes sense to have a smaller radius for the minors, because $300 on a project that your fees are $1,000 is sort of real money, especially if it's not that big of a deal of a project. And as for the second units, I don't know, that just looks like pulling a building permit to me, and I don't understand why we're noticing it all.
Yeah.
And the second unit permits, we do get a lot of complaints from neighbors saying that we're densifying the neighborhood, we're creating further impacts on traffic and parking. Typically, most people are against them, but again, we have to explain.
Write a letter to Jerry Brown. I mean, no, I mean, it's like,
So, yeah, you
I
can't
get
do
it, but
anything
it's-
about it.
There's only so much we can do, and we need to get used to it, because they're gonna keep pushing this stuff down on us. It's just gonna come more and more, so, and I know people complain about second units, but second units are a much better way to deal with our arena numbers than if we have to build big old apartment buildings all in town, so.
But there is something
Bring
to,
on an amnesty.
I get the of right, I totally agree with that. It's kind of three things going on here. But there's something about the second, I know, Bob, what you're saying, I'd want to know, I know there's nothing I can do about it, but if one of those popped up in my neighbor's backyard,
You'd ask questions.
I'd want to know, so that potentially, and I have a good relationship with my neighbors, I'd want to know, like, okay, what are you doing, and like, where are you gonna park the thing, and I'm not gonna be able to do anything about it, but at least I know. And I don't know, there's something, I would be okay with that, having to put a low $120 sign out there, say, hey, we're putting this 586 square footer. Now I think it's up to, by right, like 1,200 or, yeah. So
At least the neighbors will know, it's not another bootleg,
Well-
and be down there talking to you about that.
I mean, I think that's a separate issue, like whether they can do anything about it, it is what it is. It's state mandated, you can do that, but like a 1,200 square foot structure pops up, that's as big as my house.
Event, yes.
So like.
That was bigger than my first house, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you could still, I mean, the problem is,
I know.
you can build a 1,200 square foot rec room, right? And you get no notice, and then you're gonna go down to staff anyhow. Go, what the heck are they doing? Or it'll be, right across the school, and you won't. So.
I don't know.
While I understand that legally we don't have any recourse and that there is it's going to go the way it's going to go, I think I look at it in terms of the relationship with the community, and part of our responsibility is to keep them informed and aware, because quite honestly, and I've said this before, that the community looks at government with a certain amount of suspicion as it is already, and the fact that if we can be more transparent, we can say, this is, now, it's not gonna relieve staff from the problem that they're gonna have to say, well, we can't do much about it because the state law is this, and I can give you a copy of the state law, and if you wanna, here's your local rep, here's their home phone number, call them, but at least.
You can't give them
at least you can, there can be the discussion where they understand it, but you could, the staff could also encourage the person that you may talk to your neighbor who wants to build it and have them explain to you how, what's gonna go on. Those are reasonable questions. I mean, they're right there.
Yeah.
So, I think that discussion is not insignificant, and I think that information to the public is not insignificant. And I think if you're gonna impact the community, the $150 for the sign is well worth the investment in goodwill and transparency.
I mean,
So
it
then
sounds
are you
silly.
saying we should notice everything, Bob?
No, we should post everything.
I mean, post. I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're saying we should post everything.
I'm okay with it.
No,
All
no,
four
no,
of those
no, no.
columns look the same.
There's no difference between a
Pool
by
house.
right second unit permit and somebody building a 1,200 square foot pool
there's a-
house.
there's a big difference.
Should we put a posting on that site?
But there's a big difference. But if I'm the neighbor, or if I'm the community, say I'm looking at it from outside the project. If I'm looking at this and I say, well, what's going on here? What's happening in my community? I think being informed, I would like to think that being informed would improve people's understanding of what's going on and improve civic involvement. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and so I'm saying towards that end, why wouldn't we make them put a sign on everything then? Because there's no different in the wood framing that's going up between a second unit permit and a pool house, right?
From the standpoint of a regular citizen, those differences don't mean an awful lot. They want to know what's going on, what's this activity on this property, what's happening here, and they wouldn't know or care about the difference between a minor variance and administrative design review and all that kind of stuff. They just want to hook into the thing, sign. It's simple.
I disagree. I think that when you get a notice from the city, or you see the signboard, it means there's something that a choice has to be made. I mean, the implication is that there's something that you could come down and comment and do something about. So if somebody's building, a too big house, and there's a sign there, you could come down and say, I don't like this second story, this house is too big, it's an ugly design, I hate my neighbor, whatever. And they say it all, right? But don't you feel like you're gonna be tricked when you see this big sign and you come down and you go, I don't like this second unit, and they're like, too bad, you can't do nothing about it?
Well, I'm not sure that they would, but you said two things. One is that they would know something about it, and then they could get some kind of relief. And I'm not guaranteeing them that the sign doesn't guarantee the second part, because there are a lot of things that people notice that get built against but at least they were informed. At least they had the process of getting information.
I mean,
that's all I look at the sign as
not
doing.
completely right in the sense of I had to post a sign for demolition of our second unit, and it wasn't like, it was by right, it had to be posted, that, the demolition was worked. It wasn't like they could go in and say, well, I don't want that to be, the sign didn't imply that you could, it told you what was happening.
It did tell you your neighborhood is changing.
I guess you could make comments.
I think I like where John's going with this, though, is that we want people to know when they see something what they should expect out of it. If you see a great big sign, go ask questions about it, right? not a false alarm every time that somebody's gonna put up a by right second unit or a by right demolition or some kind of project like that. Like, let's let people know that when this sign is out there, ask questions, participate in the process.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Prop 65 warnings. It goes everywhere. Everything causes cancer in California, right? I've seen that sign everywhere. I don't care about it. I want the sign to actually mean something.
But it does. It means your neighborhood is changing.
Yeah, but so does the rec room, which may or
Well,
may
but-
not
but-
be used as
but-
a rec
but-
room. I don't know.
The rec room did not have a sign.
The rec room did not have a sign, but even
And
illegal.
no one could comment, and that's why it got built.
Even
That was-
illegal, even illegal.
Oh, that rec room.
That was illegal, yeah.
But I mean, even a legal rec room. I mean, there's a house down the street from me that they demoed almost the whole of the house and left the garage and like a
One
wall.
around the corner from me too.
And so no sign, no nothing, and I'm like, I wonder what happened. I asked staff, and they told me somebody's redoing a whole bunch of their stuff. They don't require any discretionary permit. They got their building permits and they're building it. There it is. And that thing is going to have a bigger impact on me than a second unit would. And neither one of them I can do anything about, even if I wanted to.
I think it's a little disingenuous to say, like, if it's a pool house or something that's adjunct to the primary use on the property, an accessory structure, okay, we can read all kinds of things into it and say, well, that could be converted to an apartment building or whatever, but let's just on face value say that's going to be used by the primary occupants of that property, right? A second unit is what it is. It's for rental. It's for another subset of folks to come in and utilize,
Right.
which brings its own things with it.
Yeah.
Noise, whatever, more vehicles to be parked, coming and going of new people in the neighborhood. I mean, which is all fine and good. I don't see anything wrong. I mean, I think they're different, slightly different animals, But the pool house and stuff, yeah, sure, it could become a second unit, but
In fact, it could be converted to a second unit, and then you'd have to put a sign on it.
Yeah, and you would.
And you wouldn't change the outside at all. I don't know.
think the use is
But it would impact the neighborhood differently than a pool house. I think you build a pool house and no one in the neighborhood would know because it wouldn't make their life any different. But these things make somebody's life different.
And I know it sounds dumb, like they're gonna come down and go, well, this is going up next door to me, okay. I mean, other jurisdictions do this all the time. There's a pamphlet or a memo sitting there going, why is my neighbor allowed to have a second unit? Here you go. It tells you all why. I mean.
It's the pound sand memo? Boom!
No,
Yeah, that's helpful.
There are other jurisdictions, you go in and go.
They could read
Why-
it to them.
Here you go, this is why you can have it. We're just letting you know.
But at least they know.
Do you want to put at the bottom of the sign that they put up, there's a second unit, you can't do anything about
Well,
it?
I think what you should do is
I'm not sure you
have a
should rub
memo
that into it.
with, just say Jerry Brown and have his phone number, or email, contact.
You could just put the.
Send your questions to Sacramento.
But if that person had a question about it and they came to staff and staff could at least, as part of that presentation to them, you are welcome to contact your neighbor who is installing this to find out, what the plan is. And, I think that would be helpful.
Here's a question, right, Vincent, you said that you get a lot of complaints or people coming asking questions about, it's gotta be after the fact, right? Because there's no, they're getting the notification or?
Notification, then they get, people will want to look at the plan. Some people we get an email or calls, or emails or letters objecting to it. A second unit.
And the response basically is, well, tough, it's by right, so.
By right.
So do you put that email in the file?
We'll respond to it.
The template.
www.poundsand.com.
So from staff's point of view, does this just, would it be better just to because that's of right, like this side of the dais is saying, we don't even need.
I'm moving over here.
Don't even have don't have the notification. Joe, I don't know where you are. You can. You have a few.
He doesn't
minutes to
either.
decide.
He's on our.
Should we just jettison the notification itself and the posting, because that's a right, that column is, like John said, it's basically a building permit. Why are we even? It would save you emails and complaints.
It would, but I think it's unfair. I think if we wanted to, we could just do noticing for everything across the board, and then we just deal with the questions, the posted notice. I think if I were a property owner, if I am a property owner, I would want to know what a neighbor is doing.
Whether you could do something about it or not.
I think it would alleviate a lot of, I don't know, tension or whatever. I mean, might create some, but it might,
Yeah.
it might help the,
You know, I think part of this is just legacy, because we used to be able to do something about it. I think we used to require CP or something. So, you know, I mean, it may be that there's a state law 2 years from now that says you can't do this, and then we'll get rid of it. Then I don't know.
That's true.
But I don't know. My preference would be to not notice at all the second unit. It doesn't give me a huge amount of heartburn if we want to do that, because we have always done that. I do think the minors, though, it would be better if we could reduce the radius down to 100 or 150.
I mean, to me, on that second unit one, I would go with posting and not the notification, because it's about the immediate neighbors, and more likely everyone's going to see that.
I'm fine with that.
That huge sign, because what that does is that posting sign costs you $100, $150. Whatever notification we do is going to be $300, $400, $500. And if we're trying to kind of, this is by right, like I'd love to have a posting or a notice for the neighbors, but I don't want it to cost like $600 for the applicant to do that.
Yeah, I think the 300
because it's by right.
is pretty crazy.
No, the notification, the cards and everything that usually goes along with a hearing or something discretionary, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely should skip the notification in a case like that. But the sign does not necessarily convey that. The sign can be advisory in one of a number of different ways depending on how we want to craft it.
I mean, yeah, those signs tend to be more informational than like.
and the sign speaks to the relationship between the city and the public, because, okay, we're making you aware. And quite honestly, I don't see a downside to that.
I agree with you entirely.
Well,
about that.
you know, if you just want to do the sign and not the notification, that gives me even less heartburn.
Yeah, I would dump the
So
notification on.
what you're saying is we do posting on site for all four. We do 300 feet for CUPs.
And 150.
150s for the minors, both variance and CUP and administrative design review. And then 0 for second unit?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not,
Yeah.
Fine.
we didn't streamline it and
I can
make
live
it
with
all
that.
the same,
Those
but-
postcards, I'm not sure I think they were a good idea back in the day, but I think that they fulfill some kind of legal obligation, yes?
Yeah, because the other way you can say,
You want to get rid of the comment period then on the second unit? I mean, what's the point
Yeah,
of
there
a
would be-
comment period and a decision?
is that the period for them to?
'Cause they can't
to
appeal,
see the
really.
sign to come and ask questions of you?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you didn't
So-
have that, then they could come and ask questions, because they can't do anything.
Right. And then there's always, like in the other cases, there's an appeal period after that 14-day comment period.
So we should really get rid of the comment period and just put the notice of decision 14-day appeal, because it's a by
Because
right
it's outright.
decision.
Can people appeal building permits?
No.
So there's not really even an appeal. I mean,
Yeah, like in the of right, what are those two things under the notification accomplishing for us?
they're just delaying the project a month is what it sounds like to me.
I mean, I could see if there was some period, like, once you post that sign, and it has to be up for 14 days, right?
Mhm. It's a comment period, so it notifies people they have 14 days to come in prior to a decision that will be made either commission or staff level to be able to look at the plan, provide comment. We take that comment under consideration, render a decision, and then you have a 14-day appeal period. But if it was a staff level decision, it could be appealed to the planning commission.
Do they, so, like on the CUP over here, the 14 days is before the hearing.
Yes.
And then 14 days after for the appeal. And then when they submit for the building permit, can they take down the sign then?
Yeah, well, they can take down the sign after they get the
comment period.
entitlement.
So they don't even have it for, I mean, it seems like if you're gonna have it, you should have them have it for the appeal period too.
No, well, we'll leave it up through the appeal period, but after that.
But not that 30-day waiting period.
No.
So then on the second unit permit, none of that really applies.
Right.
It's just a notification. It's just a posting on site that we're saying. The rest of it would go away.
Yeah.
But you gotta tell them when to do it at some point, right? Because otherwise they wait till it's built. Put it out. The whole purpose of it is.
No, I'm assuming that the posting on site is the initial 14 days. You said that it has to be up for 14 days?
Yeah.
So the posting on site has to happen for
They can
14
take it
days
down,
before you would submit for the building permit.
And one would presume in that 14 days, people have seen it and have come down.
If they're gonna, or
if they're gonna ask questions or whatever.
Or at least they've been informed that this is, the neighborhood's changing.
Yeah, so if you left it up for the same 14 days, that would be, that's it.
Yeah, so the posting on site, which is a 14-day default.
Yep.
Then you skip the radius notification, the comment period, the notice of decision, and you go straight to the submit for building permit.
Mhm. And then you still need a 30-day waiting period for something?
That's for, it's not for the entitlement, it's for the demolition. So we can even just kind of ignore that. I just wanted to show what the whole overall.
Because there may not be a demolition.
'Cause if there's no demolition.
So that's only if there's a demo?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
if something
well,
has to be removed, then you have all these things that you have to do. You know.
Okay, fine. So could we go back to the prior slide? No, I mean the other,
The as it is today?
Yeah, this picture. So we want to change the 10 and the 20 to both 14, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And then make the whole, okay, yeah.
Then the two in the middle become 150.
150.
Yeah.
And then there's none on the end. So it's that, which actually makes sense. It's kind of cascading, like.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're gonna post across.
Site for all. So the second column comes 150 feet. We get rid of, for second units, the 300-foot radius, and also the 14-day comment period.
This is a nitpicky thing, but John, you brought it up, like, you kind of really have 3 columns, not 4. 'Cause minor variance isn't it another administrative?
It is.
Well, it should be exactly like that one.
Yeah.
Couldn't it be a comma, like, because you have minor CP / ADR / minor variance. It's all following the same.
Right, it's just that when we made them ages ago, they were, minor variances were made separate. And then when we did administrative hillside permit and administrative design review, we copied minor CUP, and that's why there's a lot of stuff in that, and that's like a weird stepchild.
Well, couldn't we just marry these two, so you really only have 3 columns?
Those should just be mushed together.
Once we, the 150-foot radius, everything kind of matches up, then that would just be, we'd be down to 3 columns.
Okay, that's good.
I like that.
Does anyone have a heartburn with that, or?
No, I just think one thing we do need to see is that, I know the way that the administrative design review and design review is written is it says, just do what CUP does. So if we change it in CUP, then it's automatically changed, but we just need to check hillside to see if it references or if they make their own rules, because if so, we'll need to change that to line up.
Add that.
Yeah. I think it just,
300 feet.
I think it just references.
And posting. So in this case, second unit, just to confirm, the 20-day comment period comes out. The radius notification comes out. And the posting and 300 feet for CUPs, variances, 150 for the others, a 14-day comment period, is that staying in?
Under minor, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it stays in here, right?
So,
That's essentially gonna.
not that.
Yeah.
so I just want to clarify, is the comment period you're considering the same posting period?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not that you post it for 14 days and then a comment period starts?
No, it's
Yep, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
that's a good question.
It's half a month, right?
Yeah, that's,
This was the easy part.
Uh-oh.
So,
Oh, boy.
oh God. So
Here we go.
this is for properties 75 years and older. So one of the issues is we amended our discretionary demolition permit ordinance, and it gives an allowance if you have an historic preservation report prepared, an historic resources evaluation report with mitigation measures. You can proceed either through environmental review, or you can proceed with a certificate of appropriateness. If a property is either culturally or architecturally eligible. Usually our C of A process is only for designated properties. So some of the projects that I had been bringing to you before, kind of these case scenarios to figure out, is this really the process that we want to do? Is this really the intent of the ordinance? And if that is the case for the discretionary demolition permit ordinance, we will then have to amend the certificate of appropriateness or the historic preservation ordinance to insert eligible projects that are eligible for designation, proceed with a C of A. So as you can see here, the way we treat this, starting at the very top, property 75 years and older, we require an historical resources evaluation report. If that report comes back as these buildings are not eligible for either case, cultural or architectural, staff processes a discretionary demolition permit. And whether it's staff review or if it's coupled with commission review, it would go to the commission, and then we'd follow those procedures. If the report comes back as eligible, either cultural or architectural, and we had both examples before the commission fairly recently, we followed the intent of the discretionary demolition permit ordinance to proceed with processing a certificate of appropriateness, a design review permit in some cases, and that report had mitigation measures, and those mitigation measures essentially took the place of an initial study with mitigation measures. And we've had conversations about whether or not this is really the direction we want to go. If it is not, then what we would end up doing with an historic resources report, we'd still have to process an initial study with mitigation measures. Those mitigation measures we would probably pull from an historic resources report that offered mitigation measures, and then proceed with the process as normal. Just to let you know, the initial study at the very base rate is about $6,900.
And it takes at least a month, right?
And it takes at least a month. A certificate of appropriateness, there is no fee involved. So we're looking at two very large gradations in terms of cost and time.
Can I just say that a certificate of appropriateness is not a substitute for an initial study, but the historic resource evaluation report can be.
Yeah.
If it's done well, and assuming that there's a finding of eligibility, the report needs to also look at the actual project that's proposed and then say, okay, if the following mitigation measures are implemented, then this project is true to Secretary of Interior standards, that sort of thing. So, but without that, then you would, you as a commission would have no information in the record to try to figure out what you're going to do with this project that's eligible but not designated, and they want to change the exterior, And because you don't have any mitigation measures proposed in the historic resources report, you would probably want that applicant to then go back and either have that historic resources report updated to provide you with that, or you'd want staff to have them do an initial study. So, which is more expensive, and we're trying to figure out a way that doesn't cost people more than they really need to pay.
Can we specify in the historical resources evaluation report that it includes the following items so that we can then leverage those, so we're not going to do it again?
We do guide staff, or I mean, we guide the applicant, especially sometimes we'll get the report back. You know, people will come in, oh, we want to do an addition, oh, well, let's look at the age. You're going to need an historic resources report. They go away maybe for 2, 3, 4 months, and then all of a sudden I get a report.
And it doesn't have anything in it that you need.
And it doesn't have what I need. So then I call them up and I say, well, this came back as eligible, and I need your project to be analyzed accordingly and offer mitigation measures and how it's going to be treated with the Secretary of the Interior standards. And then they have to go back and amend that report, and then I get a supplement to it.
So when they come to us initially, can we give them some kind of document that says, your report needs to include, you know, here are the check boxes?
Well,
We could create that at the staff level. That would be a useful handout.
Yeah, like you say, if in the process of preparing a historical resource evaluation report, if it's deemed eligible, then we'll need to provide mitigation.
And I tell them that up front once they find out that we need mitigation measures. I don't think many people understand what that might mean.
I don't think so either.
Right.
And I don't know if they're translating that information.
Well, there are people that will look up the history of your house, because I've hired them to do that. And all they do is they go back and look up building permits and who lived there. And it's not the same as a historical report. And so, you know, they may go to one when they really need the other, but if they have a checklist of the following things must be included in your report, you know, chapter 1, chapter 2, whatever, however you want to format it, then it seems like when we get down to this part, we've got the answers to the questions that we need to proceed.
And now as I'm starting to build more relationships with people on our list, architectural historians, because they'll submit, I might call them up and have questions.
Yeah.
I think now they understand, and they'll be able to guide their client with the right direction, that if it comes back as eligible, we need to take additional steps before we actually submit it.
I mean, yes, they do. That does vary a lot, and very definitely the people that write the house biographies, you know, pretty clearly, a real historic resource evaluation is pretty much guided by CEQA, and there are a number of different things that sometimes you get a ranch burger, and to go through all of these CEQA items for a ranch burger looks a little, you know, absurd, but it is, if you're really following procedures, then I think that a real qualified consultant, well, they have to understand. You can have the list there, okay, just as a checklist, but you know, if they don't know, they're never going to be able to go through what CEQA would require anyway.
And the reports that we receive, you know, they could vary significantly, depending upon the qualifications, expertise of that historian.
Yeah, and there's a risk too of over inclusion. You know, the sort of, oh, isn't it cute and it's old? It's potential, and it's so much easier to say it's potential than it is. You know, it seems like the bar gets lower and lower. And when we did the DDP ordinance, the person who approved it was the same person who approved the replacement project. And so if you're just adding on a small thing, you know, that could be done at staff level. The problem is, once you say that the house is eligible, if you don't want to spend $6,900 to go to initial study, we go through the certificate of appropriateness, and that means everything comes to us. And so somebody's trying to do the little porch on the back, and it's like, wow, why are we, you know, making this a giant federal case? And I think that's a problem in the way we're we're going through, especially if it's culturally significant. Because if it doesn't have architectural significance and, you know, John Wayne had drinks there, who cares if they put a patio in the back?
Yeah.
Or, and then we're gonna make them come to us and, yeah, it just seems serious overkill.
May I make a couple of clarifications on this? First of all, if John Wayne had a drink there, yeah, I don't know about that. If a president was assassinated there, it may want to be what's called an interpretive museum, and in which case there would be and that would be a pretty unique situation, and that would really be at a higher standard. The other thing you said, you used my favorite C word, you know, cute. If you don't have this linked to some very specific information in your local ordinance, and you follow CEQA, you know, they're using the California and the National Register criteria, and that sets the bar way up there. Okay, cities that think they're being tough by using CEQA, they shoot themselves in the foot, because it's sort of like, yeah, the bar's so high, you know, 98% of everything in your city's going to go right under it, no problem, you know. So we need to make a decision that way, and that may be another adjustment in the ordinance as well.
Should we provide an allowance for staff level review for eligible properties? And then just looking at what that might look like, I don't know if we want to go this direction or not, but historical resources report, if it's eligible, cultural or architectural, then it could either go planning commission one way, or it could go through staff level and go through the discretionary review permit process. And a certificate of appropriateness if we modify the language in the historic preservation ordinance.
What does that get us? Yeah, I'm legally, I have to say I don't see how it benefits anybody to be shunted to a certificate of appropriateness, because it will not answer any of the mitigation questions or the CEQA questions, and you generally, and that's why in Sierra Madre, you don't need a certificate of appropriateness if you want to change the exterior of a property, unless it's a designated property. If it's simply eligible, the way the code reads now, there's no requirement for a certificate of appropriateness if you want to change the exterior of an eligible property. But if you want to do, if you are kind of shunted down this road because your property was over 75 years old and you had to get the historic resources report, then if it's well done, it should answer the question of whether your proposed project, which involves some level of a demolition, or you wouldn't be applying for the discretionary demolition permit, your historic resources report should answer the questions. Is your proposal, what you want to do for this property that we've now determined is eligible, are we still going to let you make these changes because we've analyzed it and we've suggested mitigation measures? And see, if you don't have that information, sending someone to the certificate of appropriateness category you're not going to get it there. That's the problem.
There's no way to measure the certificate.
Right. It's either CEQA, initial study, or it's the historical resources report. And certainly the initial study is more costly than someone getting an historic resources report and just coming either to staff or to the commission under a discretionary demolition permit. And they're asking, like, can I remove this wall, or whatever it is they want to do, maybe just, remove the whole structure. And so they've got the report, and then based on, if the report's well done, you'll be able to use that without making them then go and get, do an initial study too, But the certificate of appropriateness isn't going to help you with that. Now, some jurisdictions require a certificate of appropriateness, even South Pasadena is one of them, even if your property is simply eligible. It's not designated, but it's eligible. And you could do that, but you're going to then, you're applying all the same standards to a decision to change the exterior of a house to properties that are merely eligible.
And there's a lot of question
And
about
that's-
what the difference is.
Right. So,
right
I mean, you
there.
could go down that road, but I think it would make it more complicated.
But
for-
I think if we did want to go down that road, then I would want to look at the procedures for certificate of appropriateness and going back up to before, do a certificate of appropriateness and an administrative certificate of appropriateness, because I think when you think about, we're only going to look at the houses that are on the list, and they're going to do remods, they're going to come before a commission. That's not putting a big onus on a lot of people. It's people who signed up for this, maybe have Mills contracts. They probably like it even. A lot of people come in here to brag, and we laud them because they really get it, and we're all happy. But if you're going to do it for eligibles, everything's 75 years old. You're going to do a really broad net, and
that's right.
That's not what eligible should mean.
Right, and we are not going
I don't
to
recommend
have
it.
a happy city if we do that. I mean, people
I'm not recommending it legally, although I represent a city that does it that way, and they do see everything.
Eligibility, as I understand it, is that it basically has enough value to it, but it just hasn't been acceded to or approved by the property owner, which is what that last step is in National Register.
Well, certainly here, here it requires a property owner to agree. Not every jurisdiction requires that.
Agree to be designated?
Yes.
Yes, to be on the
Yes.
list.
Well, don't go there.
I hear you, yeah. No, the lawsuit about that.
Back in the day.
That's right.
So,
Serious bloodletting.
yeah, so, but if,
Remember that, right, John?
part of the backstory here is that we've requested that there be an inventory of the houses in town for significance. Now,
Yes.
if that were true, then maybe the 75-year or older criteria could be flexible enough, so, hey, are they on the list?
Right.
And then we go down. But now, because eventually everything in town is going to be 75 years old, unless, well, most of the things in town are going to be 75 years old, even the ranch houses. But I still go back to the point that if you are on the list, then you still have to get a historical resources evaluation that lists all that criteria and the mitigation measures, so that we can have the points of reference for the decisions for later on. But
Yeah,
being
I
on the
think
list
that's
and
right.
having the report are two different things.
But why?
Yes.
I don't understand why in the initial report we can't ask for that. If it becomes eligible and you want to demolish part of it, you're not going to get to certificate of appropriateness, but we'll at least have mitigation measures in that report. Like, it doesn't seem like that's impossible.
That's what we're asking.
That's what we do now.
It's just that we don't get that all the time. It varies. Is that what we're saying?
Depends on the person preparing the report. Then we'll ask, if it comes back as eligible, then we'll ask for it. But generally, we're telling them, make sure the architectural historian includes mitigation measures and references CEQA and the Secretary of the Interior standards based on whatever addition or modification you're doing to that property.
If you are really doing these reports correctly, and during the report you are going down the path of the property having real historic value to it, then one of the steps in there, you don't just identify it by style or period of building or anything like that, but you go forward in terms of the quality, registers will ask, about high artistic value and uniqueness and so on and so forth, that you really have to do a very academical kind of description, intelligent description of. And then another part of that is also that you are going to, following the Secretary of the Interior's standards, you're going to talk about, well, what are the real character-defining features, for instance, the elements of the architecture. How do you say that it's okay to put an addition on or modify the back of a house versus the front of the house? Well, often it's because most of the character-defining features that are really important to the public are going to be on the front of the house. Well, you should be talking about that, and that requires some knowledge of the proposed project. And maybe in a lot of cases, staff can proceed from that point too.
Well, I think that, I think a fundamental issue you had is Bob was saying, is we need to understand how many eligible houses there are. I mean, that because if we have, I don't know, 80 eligible houses, it's an entirely different ballgame than if we have
800,
1,600 or something. I don't know the exact number of our housing stock that's 75 years old, but in just a few years, we're going to start to get post-war stuff that's going to be more than 75 years old, and then you're just going to get a whole bunch of stuff that's just not historic, and it's going to be eligible, and so I think. We're sort of talking around the issue. We need, the first thing is we need to decide, are we going to do a citywide historic survey to narrow down the list of eligibility? And if we are, then we can, maybe it makes sense to do this kind of rigorous review for eligibles. But if we're going to have an eligible review, I mean, if we're going to say everything that's that old is eligible, well, I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a situation where we need to water it down or have some escape mechanism that people can do small projects without costing tons of money and taking a lot of time, or enough people are going to get caught in this trap, they're going to get pissed off, and there's going to be another initiative, or there's going to be something that's going to throw everything out, because it's not right. I just want to put a patio in my backyard and look at my house, it's not historic, and people go, yep, okay, now do a survey and do and it's just, that's too much.
These are all very, very important points, and we perhaps should be looking at some staff guidelines, first of all, to maybe we screen out an awful lot of this stuff that you're talking about before people spend $5,000 or $6,000 on, I'm embarrassed the number of those things I've written for La Cañada the last 2 years that are just for ranch burgers because they require it. It's a joke.
So, right now we're looking at anything built before 1943. This town went through a huge boom in the 50s. So we're 7 years away from going from a small number to a really big number. Is there any way we are supposed to meet with City Council at some point? Is there any way that we could then all do a full court press and make this issue, move it up on the agenda? Because I think if we had had one list that we agree on the historical significant houses, then if we go back and ask them for a report, or at least when someone comes to the counter, and they've got a 1950 house, staff can look up and say, well, you're not on the list, therefore it's a different process. Whereas if you're on the list, then you're dealing with a version of what we see here.
Or if you want to be put on the list.
Well, we've got that already. I mean, if people want to get put on the list, they can.
They're on the list. Right now, it just says 75 years, and you didn't.
No, I understand.
And so
but I'm saying that if they don't agree with the decision of the list.
Well, then they have there'd be a process for them to decide whether, and we may say, well, okay, we think you should be on the list for the following reasons. Tell me why you shouldn't be on the list.
And then you have to have the criteria, you have to have the specific criteria why, as opposed to just getting pulled into CEQA. We can have our own specific criteria, can't we? I mean, we don't have to say, well, it's absolutely the same standards as National or California Register. Because frankly, there might be 3 or 4 houses in Sierra Madre that would truly make it if we had to go by that. Now, the big problem to me about that is that flies in the face of community preservation, which should be a much more mellow standard. You know, you don't want to say, well, if we're going to make a whole community out of National Register buildings, you're not going to.
Right.
You know, all there is to it. So we have to decide what our standards want to be, what we want to use, and you know, what's really in support of community preservation.
Be on the committee
generally.
that advises the city council when they go to write the contract.
You know, and then the other issue is if we want to go towards some sort of district thing, because then, you know, you can be a contributor to a district at a pretty low level that would make you eligible. So I think these are sort of fundamental issues that we need to decide. The other thing we might do is, if we're going to pull from this giant pool, maybe we have some sort of thing that we put up before, on the top of the list, before a full survey that has some sort of initial, not an initial review, because that's got CEQA, an initial study, that's CEQA terminology, but just some sort of an ability to weed out the things that are obviously not historic, so that people who live in ranch burgers can do the shed in the back or the.
Are you saying absent of a master list?
Well, yeah, I mean,
if you had the master list,
if you had the master list,
answers it,
right? Exactly, and I think that's the way to do it. But if, for whatever reason, we can't get ourselves to do that, maybe we have some sort of initial review-y kind of thing where staff can do that.
I mean, is that something even on the radar, or is it like we're years away from figuring that out? Like, it doesn't make sense to do a full court press if it's something that's on the fence.
Well, the thing is when we amended the demolition ordinance the last time, council said pretty much we're amending this and doing a very large dragnet, very tight ordinance, because we sort of look at it as a moratorium, because we're going to do a survey to weed out the number of eligible things. And so, and I agree with that concept. The way we're doing it now is a good stopgap, but it's not a permanent solution. It just doesn't work. And so we need to decide, are we going to do a survey and winnow down the number of eligibles, or are we going to do something else to put another step in there, or what? And that's, we start to get above our pay grade, I think.
Yeah, talking about all of the post-war housing, one of the reasons that you may get flooded is that, you know, an awful lot of that housing stock that's coming up on 75 years was all, you know, the boom stuff, you know, the building boom stuff right after the war, and they're pretty, the ones that haven't already been heavily modified, they're going to get knocked down, make much better, fuller use of the property. They're going to get modified heavily, as you know. I think that that era of housing stock is starting to come to the end of its usefulness anyway, and it's not going to coincide with that 75-year thing. You're going to get bombed.
People are watching the TV and they're seeing how they can be modified and made into something else, and so they want to do that.
Overnight.
We all agree on that, like that concept, like the housing that will be caught in the next 10 years, you know, 50s housing, late 40s, 50s. Wouldn't it be, on the other flip side, easy to just change that 75 to 85? I don't know.
Yeah, you could.
Like,
I mean, you hear, I found the housing stock. We've got, before 1940 is about a quarter of the houses.
Before 1940.
Before 1940. The 40s are 10%. The 50s are another quarter. Just
Wow,
the 50s.
okay.
So once you get to 1960, you're going to have 60% of the housing stock.
And our 75-year rule is not all that normal. Most places are 50. Yeah. In fact, a lot of places will start, because of the length of time that a process takes, they start looking at you at 45 years, right?
But it also, I mean, some of that's dependent on like what you just, the ebb and flow of the housing stock, right? So there, like you said, there was a large boom, of building in the 50s or whatever. So that date, it's not arbitrary, but it's tailored to kind of the ebb and flow of construction, So like you could just as easily say anything older than 85 years, and that I think that the proper way is what you said, to have that master list. But I mean, I don't know if that's something everyone just talks about and we'll see that in the next decade, or if it's something imminent. And if not, then all we have is what we have. And in that case, you just have to roll back.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, right now, our preliminary list is really just a math question of 75 years or more, right? I mean, maybe it's more complicated than that. Maybe it's, if you're 100 years or more, then for sure, and if you're 75 to 100, it's X, and if it's 50 to, I don't know. I mean, the thing is...
Is that the next slide, Vincent?
No. And then you have like, well, I don't know, I'll stop with the jokes. But the point is that I think we need real policy guidance on where to go with this.
And that's part of the discussion we want to have with council in a joint study session.
Okay. We have a couple things on the agenda to talk to them about, because we need some resolution and guidance.
How many? Is there a timeline on when that might happen?
Possibly July. I'm trying to figure out when we're going to have some time to work with them, given our schedule and their schedule and other projects coming up, to be able to do that. But we've been saying that since the beginning of the year. We're already into May.
And doesn't the council pretty much go dark in August?
Yeah.
So if we don't get July, we're talking September.
Yeah.
And when everyone starts putting their schedules out at July, I'm putting my money in September.
Yeah, I know.
Do we have a lot of these projects in the pipeline?
Quite a few of them, yes.
Oh dear.
And what's the nature of them, generally speaking? Are they for demolition or
Additions.
Minor stuff?
A little, it's really mixed. And we have a number of applications that have been submitted, they're incomplete, and they're just on the books for 6 months, and we don't hear back from people.
And is that because they throw their hands up in frustration saying, I got to get a survey for this and a study for that? And
possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
But some of them have already submitted applications, and then they just kind of disappear.
And they find out how much it costs to prepare this $7,000 report for a house that's been modified 5 times since
estimates for construction, and then they just say, well.
Yeah, there are lots of reasons why projects go south in midstream.
But are you finding it that, I mean, that happens in all sorts of projects for one reason or the other, but the percentage of applications in this category is higher than normal?
Over the past 3 years, in terms of like requiring an historical resources report, I did that analysis. I don't have that presentation here. That's a separate one. I think I had about 39 applications, and out of the 39, only 4 were eligible.
Wow.
So that means we had this large chunk of applications that we required somebody to prepare an historic resources report that came back that it was not significant.
Did you look at those before they did it? I mean, did you go out and?
Some of them we did, and we would say this is not eligible.
Yeah. I mean,
That's the problem.
yeah, I mean, I'd imagine there's probably some where you're like, it'll be interesting to see how this comes back. But, yeah, the ones where you go out and you go, no, you know, that's a problem. Because we're beating those people up for no good reason.
Yeah.
It's not
And it's the
protecting,
majority,
it's
right.
not protecting the community
We
at
are
all.
now offering, if the architectural historian is willing to do that, because people are concerned about the cost.
Mm-hmm.
If they show us photos of, you can't say that this is eligible, then we would say, well, then work with whomever you select and see if they're willing to go out and look at the property and see if they're willing to do an abbreviated report, because they would be able to tell, possibly, at least architecturally, not culturally, without doing the research, if that property required a more intensive survey.
Yeah. So that's a sort of a de facto initial check before you, and then, well, that makes sense, I think.
And $800 is, I think, somebody paid for an abbreviated report. We've had one.
But
Well,
the cost goes up from there.
Yeah, but $800 is a lot better than $5,000.
Oh, yeah. And it's also a time thing, too.
Yeah.
I mean, not that we are concerned with that, but because of ordinances like this, you know, where you catch a lot of potential projects that need a report, consequently, you know, and the number of qualified historians or architects who do this, you know,
So a waiting list.
you get on the list, and it's months down the road
And
to
the
get
person,
it.
one company that did the abbreviated report said that they did not charge enough, and it still took quite a bit of time.
Yeah, I believe it.
I'd be interested if you can say who did that, the abbreviated report?
It was, you want me to say it publicly?
You can, because the document would be a public
Yeah.
document,
Yeah.
because they had to submit it
It
to
was
you.
Sappos.
Okay. I was
They
interested.
produced very good reports.
Is Sappos the one we saw the last one,
Yeah.
where they did the interpretation of the project? That was really
That was a
good.
very
That was
good
really
report.
helpful.
Yeah, I was really interested in knowing who they were, just mainly because maybe we need some guidance in creating some standard for some guidelines for what an abbreviated report really should be.
So circling back, part of what we talked about tonight is that when people are informed that they have to do a report, that they get enough guidance so that we can get the mitigation get that into the report, so that we have something to work with in the event that we have to go through this process.
Right.
But the better solution is that we come up with one list of the addresses in town that have historical significance, and we can then let the other ones go through the normal process. But the ones that we can then have some kind of process in place so that they can help us make the decision.
And if the city goes the route of an historic resources survey, those vary in cost as well. Windshield survey, and then you go into more detail and the cost continues, so. It
But
depends
if
what
we,
want.
I mean, if we do a survey, a citywide one, it goes through a public hearing process, right? So
Yep.
if the company identifies, 79 houses or whatever, and the historical society or some other people think, oh, you left these 3 off, they could submit evidence that those 3
Right.
should be on the eligible list.
Right.
Because I think the other part of it is, it's a small town. I think there's a lot of volunteer. There would be a lot of interest in making that eligible list right, and so I think maybe we could try to trim the cost down and use volunteers as much as possible and whatnot.
I was I had the opportunity to be discussing this with a consultant yesterday, and talking about the idea that windshield survey, any survey like that can miss properties that have cultural significance, to them. And she was saying that, well, a survey for a municipality that's well done is going to include some non-windshield research into, documentation of, who was important in town, what was important in town.
Well, the good news is there's been enough books published about Sierra Madre that they could probably sit
We got a
down
lot of information for
and
them
make
to
a
go
list.
Yeah,
of
we've
things.
got a good, I mean, that's one thing.
We're in
we
good
do
shape
have
that way.
there.
We just have to put those two things together.
So I guess one of the questions that we're really looking at is when we process these, that we process them through a certificate of appropriateness now, that's sort of not,
It's not in our code.
we're sort of,
Flying without a parachute.
Right.
Kind of. Duct tape and baling wire kind of thing. So, and staff has proposed the modification of 1782-090A, which would allow us to process C of A's on eligibles. Is that a useful code amendment as a stopgap, or is the time that we're going to take before we could get to a joint meeting and some discussion short enough that it's a waste of time for us to do a stopgap?
That's the language of putting eligible in, oh, I have it.
Yeah, it basically just says on the C of A, you can do it on designated or eligibles.
Mhm.
So I'll give you another example. Second unit came back as eligible. They were doing a garage conversion, so 400 square foot second unit. They were installing a carport, two-car carport, covered carport. I ended up doing a environmental initial study with mitigation measures based on the report. I didn't charge them for the initial study in this case, but we did design review. But that's when you start looking at these things, that cost gets very, very high very quickly.
Well, and it's not like the $1,600 is just made up mumbo jumbo. I mean, there's a lot of staff time.
30-page initial study.
Yeah.
They paid for an historic resources evaluation report that had mitigation measures. And that's how I'm pulling the mitigation measures really from the report into the initial study.
Did you already do the initial study? Did you get any comments?
Yeah, many that people did not want the second unit because it's going to have an impact changing a single-family residentially zoned area into.
But you did the initial study just on historic?
Yes.
And nobody commented on historic?
No.
Yeah, so.
Oh, man.
That's why we're going to post.
That's the galley.
That's what makes the difference.
I'm going to put your home number.
So where do we stand? What do we?
So it looks like we're going to table the discussion until at least we, certainly for something like this, we would have to run this by city council. This was all going to be part of a discussion to try to figure out what direction we really want to go and have that discussion with council in a joint study session.
What can we do to prepare for it in terms of ideas and so forth we should be developing to bring there?
Now, I guess what we need to do is identify the list of topics that we want to address, not just this. I'm sure there are others.
Submit them to you on email? Okay. But I think council needs to hear this, and they need to understand that
They need to
decision for
see that one flow chart that goes all over the page.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, and they're, while they grabbed at 75 years, the impact of that is coming due soon.
Right.
That's from scale.
That's Yeah, that SCAG chart that John has that shows the age of the housing and the fact that within 5 years, 33% of the houses would qualify for this review. That's what his numbers show.
Yeah, and then some word graphics
third.
with, like a planning pulling their hair out.
I
Some
don't
dollar
think that's getting
signs-
you anything.
Some dollar signs next to some of
What
the
about, don't use me as that model.
clip art does wonders. All right.
Excellent,
So that
okay.
concludes
So are we gonna,
our discussion.
are you gonna go ahead and work on code amendments for the processing? Because that, I think, is pretty straightforward, right?
I can.
The
Yeah,
front
I think-
stuff, yeah.
Because that, I think, makes sense. There's the fact that you all are going through all these different weird machinations instead of just having a standardized process, that would be really great to get that fixed.
Okay, so that brings us back to oral communications, and we see no one in the audience, so we can skip that. We go from members of the planning commission. Anything for the good of the,
I have a question.
shoot.
Let's say hypothetically you have a restaurant and you recently gotten yourself a CUP and you decide to go park a cooler out in front of it.
Let me guess, a 40-foot refrigerator semi
40-foot
with a
long
motor on it.
Semi-trailer in your front parking lot and you don't open anymore.
Yeah, and you don't open anymore, right.
Do we have any idea what's going on over there?
Which address? Or what?
This would be
Sierra Fusion.
Sierra Fusion, thank you.
It's my understanding that he's taken a hiatus because he's doing the showcase.
Yes, and that's posted on the door.
But he's not gonna-
It just said seating. It didn't say anything about how long it was going to be.
Did you say the
Yeah,
showcase
it's
trailer?
Over May 26th, he'll be back.
Okay.
But is he gonna move the giant truck? I mean, people can close down their business if they want for a little while, but the giant truck is a giant truck. I mean,
Well, I guess my concern was more if the building's going to go dormant so that the catering business can continue to function.
right.
I think,
Because that unit and I guess my follow-on question was, do we need to consider commercial kitchen a different use than restaurant when we talk about the commercial zone?
We do have catering service or something as one of the uses. We should look at that.
We should look at that.
and one of the parts of the conversation, the presentation, was that there would be no catering trucks parked there because it would be somehow disruptive to but the 40-foot semi was somehow omitted from the conversation, so, okay, whatever.
Yeah, that. Yeah, okay.
Just something for our radar.
Okay.
Speaking of uses, moving on circling back to the commercial code. So we revised the codes based on our discussion, including the use table. And as part of that, we started looking at the uses as they're defined in the general definitions of the zoning title. And we talked to staff about whether we should attack that at the same time because they go together, or we should save that for another bite. And we were thinking of just punting for now. But then it came up that the prohibition on short-term rentals and Airbnbs, which we all thought was really clear, isn't so clear maybe. And so maybe one way to address that is if we're gonna look at those use definitions now, we could just do that and fix that while we're doing it. So we started looking at that.
And it may be, that's something that we should probably talk with city council about, because the use of a facility on short-term rentals, you can tax and provide business licenses, and you
Right.
can have a hotel tax for town, which it stays inside the municipality. It doesn't go to Sacramento, and some of it come back. So it may
Well, we
be,
have that tax
yeah, we already have that tax, so.
on our one hotel.
A one-room hotel.
One-room hotel.
Right.
And we won't ask how much we've made in the last
That's
5
gotta
years
be a
on it, but
great
anyway,
tax.
so, but it may be council will see that as an opportunity. Certainly the city of Los Angeles has, fallen all over it, so, I think that would be also on the agenda for the city council.
Right, and one of the things, just to double back on that, the places where we currently allow hotels, are, including bed and breakfast inns, which are a type of hotel, is the commercial zone, the manufacturing zone, and in historic properties with a CUP. But there's a question whether, if you really think you could get this much of this bed tax on the short-term rental, whether you would want to have that kind of thing as a conditional use in the multifamily areas. And that's, again, sort of a bigger policy issue. But we still, I mean, we should be able to have those revisions available if we wanted to take another chunk at the commercial code at the next meeting.
What else is on the docket for the next meeting?
Well, right now, I don't have any cases scheduled for the next meeting, so if the subcommittee is met, and the packet would have to go out next week to be put on the May 17th meeting to continue our discussion for the commercial.
Yeah, we can do that, because we like I said, we did all the revisions for the other parts. It's just the definitions, and some of the definitions are, oh god, they're bad. And there's lots of things where over time there was like some definition that must have been used somewhere, and then they cut that code out, and then it's never used. So we've got these definitions that just are never used in the code. And then we have definitions that are general definitions, but when they're used in some places, they're defined differently and used differently. And then we have 3 different types of dump. Like really detailed definition of different kinds of dump for I don't know what purpose. But we crossed off dump, so we can delete those too.
Anything else from the commission? How about staff?
I'll just mention that yesterday I was at the Los Angeles Conservancy's annual awards luncheon.
Oh, good.
So it's really nice to see when we step outside of our little zone here how much horsepower there is, how much interest there is in preservation, restoration work, in the broader Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of heavy hitters there. It's pretty impressive program.
Yeah, it's a good program. Okay.
Okay, nothing further.
I'm sorry,
from
go ahead.
staff?
Okay. All right. With that, we are adjourned.